Hello everyone, I'm the Creeps Cabin. I know you use these videos to fall asleep. So before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. When I was 16, my life was a blur of boredom and wanting to feel alive. I lived in a small town where there wasn't much to do except sit in the McDonald's parking lot at night or drive around until we ran out of gas money. That night was like every other. I remember it was humid late summer, and we were all crowded in Josh's old Ford Explorer, the smell of stale fast food wrappers mixing with someone's cheap body spray. The windows were down because his AC barely worked, and warm air rushed in, making everyone's hair flutter. We sat there, eating fries someone had found on the floor, just talking about random stuff, when one of the guys, Logan, leaned forward and said there was this creepy place about 45 minutes out of town. At first, I didn't pay attention. I thought he was just making up stories to pass time. But he kept going, saying it was a house where this old man lived, a man who had been on the news years ago because of how he scared off trespassers with a gun. Everyone got quiet, the way people do when a story is just weird enough to feel real. Logan said the house was down a dirt road with no lights, and the man would hang dolls from trees around his property. He said sometimes he would shoot at cars just for driving too close. My stomach turned a bit when he said that, but then everyone started getting excited, daring each other to go see it. Before I knew it, Josh was turning the keys in the ignition and pulling out of the lot, gravel crunching under the tires as he sped off into the dark. We drove for a while with the windows down, music low, the only lights coming from the dashboard and the headlights cutting through the dark highway. After about half an hour, Logan told Josh to turn left onto a small dirt road. The turn was so sudden Josh almost missed it, and the truck bounced as the wheels hit the uneven ground. The road was narrow, with weeds brushing up against the sides of the car. I could hear rocks and gravel kicking up under the tires, rattling against the frame of the truck like rain on a tin roof. There were no street lights, no mailboxes, not even reflectors along the edge of the road. Just darkness and our headlights catching trees, bushes, and sometimes a raccoon scuttling away. Every bump sent us flying up off the seats a little, and every time I landed back down, my stomach twisted tighter with fear. I tried to tell myself we'd just see some rundown place, laugh, and go home. But the way Logan was acting, almost too quiet now, staring straight ahead, made me feel like this was different from other pranks or dares we'd done. We drove for what felt like forever, but Logan kept saying we were almost there. Finally, Josh slowed down. I saw a hand-painted wooden sign nailed to a crooked post on the side of the road. The paint was faded and chipped, but under the glare of the headlights, I could still read it. Slow, 5 miles per hour. The writing was jagged and uneven, like whoever wrote it didn't care if it was readable or not. Josh slowed the car down to a crawl, and Logan told him to cut the lights. My chest tightened. The darkness swallowed us, and for a moment, we were just floating in blackness. Then Josh turned off the engine, and the silence pressed down so heavy it felt like I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. We rolled forward slowly, just enough for the moonlight to slip through the windshield. I squinted, trying to make out what was ahead. At first, I saw trees. Tall, thin trunks crowded together so tightly it looked like a wall. But then I noticed something hanging from the branches. I blinked a few times, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me, but they weren't. Dolls. Everywhere. Each tree had at least 10 dolls tied to it. Some were hanging by their necks with rough brown rope, swinging a little in the warm breeze. Some were tied to the trunks with wire, their heads slumped to the side, their arms stretched out as if nailed to a cross. Their clothes were dirty, shredded from rain and wind, some with holes exposing their plastic stuffing. A lot of them were missing eyes, or their faces were burned, melted in weird warped shapes. My stomach clenched when I saw red paint on a few of them, thick and messy, dripping down like blood. Some dolls were baby dolls, some Barbie-sized, some ragged stuffed animals with their insides ripped out. They swayed and twisted in the breeze, their dead eyes staring at nothing. We kept rolling forward in silence, no one breathing, the truck barely moving, tires crunching slowly over gravel. Then I saw it. Through the trees, about 50 yards away, there was a house. If you could even call it that. It looked like it was rotting from the inside out. The porch sagged forward, half collapsed, with wooden boards missing like broken teeth. The windows were covered with metal sheets and dark trash bags, flapping in the breeze. The roof dipped in the middle, like it was ready to cave. There was an old rusted truck in front, flat tires sunk into the dirt. Its windows were shattered out, and it was covered in the same red paint as the dolls, smeared across the hood and doors like someone's handprints. I could feel tears starting to burn my eyes. I don't know why I felt like crying. Maybe because I realized then that this wasn't just some abandoned place. Someone lived here. Someone spent hours hanging those dolls. Someone painted those fake blood stains. Someone wanted people to be afraid. Then, the front door opened. It didn't swing open fast. It just cracked open slowly, creaking so loud I could hear it from where we were parked with the engine off. The porch light flickered on, a weak yellow glow barely reaching the ground. The first thing I saw was the end of a shotgun. It came out first, poking into the night like a warning. Then the man stepped out. He wasn't huge, but he wasn't small either. He looked like a normal old man, wearing dirty denim overalls, no shirt underneath. His skin was pale in the moonlight, almost gray, and his hair was wild, sticking out in greasy clumps. Even from that distance, I could see his eyes were dark, sunk deep into his face. He raised the shotgun to his chest, not aiming it yet, but holding it like he'd been holding it for years. I saw him squinting out at us, trying to see who was there. My chest was pounding so hard I thought my ribs might break. Josh whispered for everyone to get down, but none of us moved. We were frozen. I felt like I wasn't even breathing. Then the man took one slow step forward onto the porch, and my body snapped back to life. Josh turned the key so fast it felt like the engine screamed awake, and he threw it into reverse, wheels skidding in the gravel. The headlights came on again, flooding the trees and dolls with bright light, making their shadows dance across the road in wild shapes. I saw the man raise the shotgun to his shoulder, and I felt something inside me drop away in terror. Josh slammed his foot on the gas, and the truck jerked backwards, bouncing over rocks and potholes so hard my teeth clacked together. No one spoke. I think I was crying. I couldn't feel my face, just hot tears streaming down as I stared out the back window, waiting for a flash, waiting for the sound of gunfire, waiting to feel a tire blow out or glass shatter. But he didn't shoot. At least not then. We flew backwards down the dirt road, branches scraping against the side of the truck like claws. Josh turned so fast onto the highway the truck skidded sideways, and we almost rolled into the ditch. He kept driving, foot pressed to the floor, until we were miles away, the speedometer needle shaking near 80. No one said a word. The silence in that truck was so thick it felt like it might suffocate me. I just stared at my shaking hands in my lap, thinking about those dolls, about how they swayed in the breeze like dead children, thinking about that shotgun and what could have happened if he hadn't hesitated, thinking about the rumor Logan said, if you weren't fast enough, he'd shoot out your tires. And what then? What would he do with a car full of teenagers stranded in front of his house? I don't know why he didn't shoot. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he just wanted to scare us. Maybe he was waiting for a different night. I never asked Logan about it again. We never spoke about it after that. It was like we all silently agreed to pretend it never happened, like if we ignored it, the fear wouldn't keep us awake at night. But it did. For weeks after, I'd wake up sweating, dreaming about those dolls hanging in the trees, their eyes following me, their heads twisting on their thin ropes. I stopped going out at night with friends for a long time. I stopped driving down dark country roads. Even now, years later, I still see those dolls when I close my eyes. I still feel the weight of that man's stare from his porch, and I still wonder what he would have done if we hadn't been fast enough to get away. Sometimes I think about how far out his house was, how long it took us to drive back to the highway, how no one would have heard us scream out there, how no one would have come looking for us until it was too late. That night changed something in me. It showed me that real horror isn't ghosts or monsters or anything like that. Real horror is a man living alone in the woods with a shotgun and a forest of dead-eyed dolls, waiting for someone dumb enough to come looking for a scare. Real horror is knowing there are people out there like that, who don't care if you're just a kid looking for a thrill. They'll end your life and go back inside like nothing happened. That's something I will never forget, and it's something I never want to see again for as long as I live. I woke up at around 3:40 in the morning. My eyes felt heavy, but my mind was awake. I was sleeping in my small room in the basement. It was cold that night, and I remember curling myself tighter under the blanket, trying to find warmth. I could hear the soft hum of the freezer in the laundry area, and a faint ticking from the old clock hanging on the wall near my bed. The room was completely dark except for a thin sliver of streetlight coming from the small basement window high up on the wall near the ceiling. The concrete floor felt colder that night than usual, and I stayed under my thick blanket without moving. I lay there quietly, just listening to the house around me. The basement was silent except for my own breathing and the ticking clock. My breathing sounded too loud in that quiet room. The blanket felt heavy over me, and I shifted my legs a little to make myself more comfortable. I could hear the distant sound of a car passing by on the main road. It was quiet again after that. I closed my eyes and tried to force myself back to sleep. But after a few minutes, I started hearing a noise. It was faint at first, like something brushing against the outside of the house. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was probably the tree branches moving in the breeze. But then it became louder. It sounded like scraping, like something was being dragged lightly against the side of the house. I opened my eyes and stared at the darkness above me. I listened harder. The sound would stop for a few seconds and then start again, a slow scraping noise that felt too steady to be just the wind pushing a branch. I stayed still listening. My heart started beating faster. I tried to tell myself it was probably nothing, but my chest felt tight. The scraping noise moved slightly, like it was now coming from the wall near the small window. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and tried to stay as quiet as possible. I thought about getting up to check the window, but I felt rooted to the bed. I stared at the shadows on the ceiling, trying to control my breathing. The scraping sound continued for a few more minutes, then stopped completely. The silence after it stopped felt worse. My ears felt like they were ringing from how hard I was trying to listen. After a few minutes of silence, I tried to calm myself. I told myself it must have been a branch after all. I closed my eyes again, and for a while I drifted between being awake and asleep. I must have fallen asleep for a bit, because I woke up again feeling a strange pressure in my chest, like something wasn't right. I opened my eyes. The room was still dark, but now I could hear a different noise. It was coming from the stairs that led down to the basement. It sounded like very faint creaking, like someone was slowly putting weight on each step. My stomach tightened, and I felt the air leave my lungs for a moment. I tried to listen harder to see if it was just the house settling, but it didn't sound like that. The steps were slow and deliberate. One step, then silence, then another step. It was so slow that it felt like whoever was on the stairs was trying their hardest not to make any noise. I stared at the shadowed ceiling, frozen in place. My heart was thumping so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. The creaking continued, step by step, moving downwards towards the basement floor. I thought I could hear very faint breathing mixed in with it, but I couldn't tell if it was real or just my own panic making me hear things. I was too scared to move my head towards the stairs. My room was laid out so that my bed faced away from the stairs, and I would have to lean up to see. I felt like if I moved, whoever was there would know I was awake. The creaking stopped. My ears were ringing with silence again. My throat felt dry and I swallowed, trying to keep myself calm. I stayed frozen under my blanket for what felt like an hour, though it was probably only a few minutes. Then I heard it again, but this time it wasn't footsteps. It was a soft rustling noise, like clothes brushing against something. Then I heard a very quiet metallic click, like a zipper being moved. My entire body was tense. I could feel sweat starting to collect under my arms and at the back of my neck despite the cold room. The noise stopped again. The silence felt like it was pressing down on me. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to reach for my phone, but it was on the small table beside my bed, and I was too scared to move my arm out from under the blanket. I kept staring at the ceiling, my eyes straining to pick up any small shadow or movement. I tried to focus on the ticking of the clock to calm myself. Tick, tick, tick. The steady sound kept me from completely panicking. Then I heard a faint thud against the carpet near the foot of my bed. It was so quiet that if I hadn't been straining my ears, I wouldn't have heard it. It sounded like something being put down on the floor very gently. My eyes started watering from not blinking. I could feel every muscle in my body tense. I couldn't even swallow. I didn't hear anything after that for a long time. I lay there with tears starting to slide down my face, not from sadness but from fear. Finally, after what felt like forever, I heard the creaking of the stairs again, but this time it was faster. The steps went up quicker than before, like whoever it was didn't care about making noise now. I heard the faint sound of the basement door opening upstairs, and then silence. I stayed under the blanket, listening. I didn't hear anything else for a long time. I didn't know how long I stayed like that, but eventually I heard the early morning birds starting to chirp outside the small window. I waited until I could see faint light coming through the window before I finally moved. My body felt stiff, and my neck hurt from staying in the same position for so long. I slowly pulled the blanket away from my face and looked around my room. Everything looked the same at first glance. The old dresser against the far wall, the laundry baskets near the freezer, the old carpet covering the concrete floor. My phone was still on the table beside my bed, and I reached for it with a shaky hand. My fingers felt numb as I unlocked the phone. It was 5:46 a.m. I sat up slowly, feeling every muscle in my backache. I looked towards the stairs. Nothing was there. The door at the top of the stairs was closed. I stood up and walked to the middle of the room, my legs feeling unsteady. That's when I saw it. Near the foot of my bed, partially under the edge of the blanket that had fallen to the floor, was a long, thin knife. It wasn't one from our kitchen. It looked old, with a dark wooden handle and a blade that had scratches all over it. There was a small patch of rust near the tip. I felt my chest tighten so hard I thought I would faint. My knees felt weak, and I sat back down on the bed. I stared at the knife for a long time. My mouth felt dry as dust. I reached out with trembling fingers and picked it up. It felt cold and heavy in my hand. I looked at the basement window again. It was closed, but there was a faint smudge on the glass near the latch, like a fingerprint. I stood up and walked to the window. My legs felt like they would give out any second. I reached up and touched the smudge. It was on the inside of the glass. I turned and looked around my room again, trying to see if anything else was out of place. Everything else looked the same, but that knife wasn't mine. It wasn't from our house. I stood there holding it, feeling a wave of nausea roll through my stomach. I walked over to my dresser and put the knife down on top of it. My fingers felt numb, and I could hear my heart beating loudly in my ears. I didn't sleep for the rest of the morning. I sat on my bed with my back against the wall, staring at the stairs. When I finally heard my parents moving around upstairs, I felt like I could breathe again. I waited until I heard them in the kitchen before I went upstairs. I didn't tell them what happened. I didn't want them to think I was losing my mind. But that entire day, I kept thinking about the sound of those slow steps coming down the stairs, and the faint breathing I thought I heard in the darkness. That night, I slept upstairs on the couch. The next morning, I went down to my room to check again. The knife was still on my dresser where I had left it. I picked it up and wrapped it in an old towel before putting it deep into a storage box in the back of my closet. I didn't want to see it again. After that, I started sleeping upstairs more often. I didn't hear the scraping outside or the creaking stairs again, but every night I lay awake for hours listening for them. Weeks passed, and eventually I tried to force myself to stop thinking about it. But it's been over a year now, and I still remember every small detail about that night. The cold air, the heavy blanket, the scraping outside the wall, and those slow, careful steps coming down the stairs. I think about how quiet they were, how deliberate. I think about the old knife that was left near my bed, and I wonder if whoever was there left it because they wanted me to see it, or if they left it because something interrupted them before they could use it. I still don't know which one is worse. I remember my grandfather's old stories better than most things I learned in school. He used to tell them late at night when he couldn't sleep, sitting in his worn chair near the back window, a little lamp beside him, and his old tin of tobacco sitting on the table. He never liked sleeping much, especially in his later years, and I think talking made him feel like he wasn't alone with his thoughts. One story he told me more than once was about a house he sold sometime after the Second World War. Back then he was trying to make ends meet. He had 7 mouths to feed, and his job at the rail yards didn't cover everything, so he worked real estate on the side. He wasn't picky about listings, didn't care about size or condition, as long as he got the commission. But there was this one house, he said, that made him rethink how he saw the world. It was a 2-story place, built around 1910, with a steep roof and a wraparound porch. It sat at the edge of town, a little removed from the others, with only one neighbor in sight down the road. The lawn was patchy and rough, full of dry weeds and half-dead bushes. Paint peeled off the wood siding in long strips, and the windows always looked dirty even after you cleaned them. People in town didn't want it, partly because it was old and partly because everyone said it just felt wrong. No one could explain exactly what was wrong about it. But my grandfather told me that if you stood in the front hall long enough, you felt like you'd swallowed a stone. Heavy, uncomfortable. He didn't believe in any of that, he told me. Back then, he thought ghosts were just for stories in the Reader's Digest or warnings in church sermons. One day he got a call from a veteran who wanted to see it. The man had fought in Europe, spent time in Germany, and was recently remarried to a German woman. She had a thick accent and rarely spoke, he told me. But her eyes moved around the house like she was expecting something to jump out of the walls. They had a boy with them, maybe 6 or 7 years old, from the man's first marriage. My grandfather said the boy was small and pale, with messy brown hair and clothes that looked a little too big on him. When they walked through the house, my grandfather did his usual talk, explaining the age of the wiring, the good bones of the place, the solid roof. He said the boy kept wandering away from them down dark halls and empty rooms. The adults would be standing in the kitchen looking at the old stove, and suddenly the boy would appear behind them again. He'd tug at my grandfather's coat and ask, "Who's the other man?" My grandfather thought the boy was playing some kind of childish prank or trying to scare his stepmother. He just smiled and told him there wasn't anyone else there. But the boy asked again and again, enough times that the father finally lost his patience. My grandfather said he didn't raise his voice. He just bent down and hissed something at the boy in a low, angry voice, then slapped him on the back of his head, so hard he almost fell over. My grandfather remembered the way the boy's face changed when he hit him, like he stopped existing inside for a moment. The German woman didn't say a word, just looked away. The man signed the papers that day. He wanted to move in quick. My grandfather never understood why people rushed into houses like that without thinking, but he was glad for the sale. He got his small commission and moved on to the next listing. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that the phone rang in his office just before he was about to head home. It was the veteran, and his voice was shaking so bad my grandfather could hardly understand him. He was begging him to come over right away. He didn't say why, just kept saying please, again and again, like a prayer. When my grandfather pulled up in his old Chevrolet, he could see that every window in the house was dark except for one at the front on the ground floor. He walked up the path, overgrown and full of dry weeds scratching at his pants, and knocked on the door. The man opened it right away. He looked terrible. His hair was messy, his face was covered in sweat, and he had dark rings under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. My grandfather said it was the worst he'd ever seen a man look outside of a funeral. The German woman wasn't anywhere to be seen, neither was the boy. The veteran led him into the living room, where a couch had been made up like a bed. Sheets, pillows, and blankets were thrown all over it. My grandfather said the whole room smelled sour, like fear and unwashed skin. The veteran told him he hadn't slept in 2 weeks. Every night, he tried to sleep upstairs in the bedrooms, but he couldn't. He wouldn't explain exactly what kept him out of those rooms. He just said he wasn't allowed to sleep up there. He never said who or what wasn't allowing him, but he didn't need to. My grandfather could see how scared he was. The man begged my grandfather to stay the night with him. He said he'd pay him $5,000 just to stay there until morning, to see what had been happening to him every night since they moved in. $5,000 back, then was more than my grandfather made in a year at the rail yards. But he didn't take it. He said that when he looked into the veteran's eyes, he saw something broken that couldn't be fixed with money. He told the man he was sorry, put on his hat, and left without another word. He told me that he never saw the family again. Within a month, the house was up for sale again. No one ever stayed in it for long. Over the years, he heard little bits about it. Someone tried to turn it into a boarding house, but renters kept leaving in the middle of the night without paying. Another family moved in during the 60s, but left before the first snow. By the 80s, it was abandoned. Kids would break in to drink or smoke and tell stories about it. Some said they saw a man standing at the window upstairs at night, just watching the street below, unmoving, hour after hour. Others said they heard someone walking around inside when the house was empty, heavy boots pacing back and forth above them. I still drive past it sometimes when I'm out that way. It's half collapsed now, roof sagging in the middle, porch rotting and leaning forward like it's bowing to the road. The grass grows tall all around it, swallowing the path and hiding the old stone steps. The windows are black and broken. Sometimes when I drive by, I slow down and look into those windows, wondering if I'll see something looking back. I don't know if there really was another man in there. I don't know if it was a drifter living in the walls, or a squatter hiding in the attic, or just the dark thoughts of a tired man who'd seen too much war and couldn't find his place in a quiet house. I don't know if the boy really saw something, or if he was just scared of his father. But I do know that whatever was there, it wasn't something you could fix with a lock on a door or a prayer before bed. My grandfather never took another listing from that agency. He kept his real estate license for a few more years, but after that he mostly stuck to the rail yards. When I asked him why he didn't take the $5,000, he said something that always stuck with me. He said that a man who offers money to keep another man in the same room as him at night isn't really asking for help. He's asking someone to drown with him, so he doesn't have to drown alone. The house is still there, sinking into the ground year by year. Sometimes I wonder if the boy ever grew up remembering that place. If he told his kids about the other man, like my grandfather told me. I wonder if he ever drove past it as an adult and felt that same stone settle in his chest. Heavy, cold, unmovable. Every time I see it, I think about what my grandfather said before he died. That some places keep a part of you. They don't let go, even when you're gone. I never go inside. I don't think I ever will. I don't need to see the upstairs rooms or the old kitchen or the rotten porch boards. It's enough to see it from the road and know that whatever was in there is probably still there waiting. Because some houses don't want to be empty, but they don't want to be lived in either. They just want to keep you there awake, seeing things out of the corner of your eye, feeling that heavy stone settle deeper until it's all you can feel. Until you're part of it, and it's part of you forever. I remember that winter like it was carved into my bones. Back then, I was just a kid, probably around 10 or 11 years old. Everything felt bigger and colder during that time of my life. The winter air used to sting my face so bad it felt like little needles pressing against my skin, and the breath coming out of my mouth would hang in the air like a little ghost following me everywhere. My family had this routine every year where we would drive up to New York to visit my grandparents for Christmas. It was something we always did, and for me it was mostly about eating too much food, watching my grandpa doze off in his armchair, and trying to ignore the quiet arguments my parents always seemed to have while packing to go back home. But that year was different. Not because Christmas was any better or worse than the others, but because of something that happened on a night I wish I could erase from my mind. We were upstate, near Saratoga. My grandparents' house was old, with peeling white paint and drafty windows that rattled whenever the winter wind picked up. Their land was quiet and dark at night. They didn't have neighbors close by, just miles of fields and distant tree lines. Even their driveway felt like it went on forever. When you drove up to their house at night, your headlights would only catch the edges of naked branches and the shine of ice on the gravel. That day we had spent in town doing Christmas shopping. I don't remember any of it, what I bought or what stores we went to, because it all blended together with every other trip we ever took. But I remember driving back. I was sitting behind my dad, staring out of the window at the blackness. I liked doing that, looking at the reflections of the inside of the car overlaying the darkness outside, creating this floating layer of ghostly images mixed with passing trees and road signs. My sister was asleep next to me, her head bobbing against the window with every bump in the road. My mom kept checking her seatbelt to make sure she wasn't strangling herself in her sleep. At some point, my dad turned off the main road onto a smaller one. It was something we always did at night when driving back from town. He liked to take this shortcut through the battlefield because he said there were always deer hanging around, their eyes reflecting like little flashlights in the grass. I liked seeing the deer too, even if it was just for a few seconds before they ran off. My dad said the place was called Saratoga Battlefield. Back then, I didn't really understand what it meant, only that my grandpa said soldiers used to fight there a long time ago. In my mind, it was just a big flat field with split rail fences and signs about history that I never bothered to read. That night, the road through the battlefield felt darker than usual. The sky was covered in clouds, and the moonlight didn't shine through at all. It felt like driving into a tunnel, with only the headlights showing us where to go. The trees on either side were just black shapes merging with the darkness beyond them. The grass in the fields was pale and dead from frost, and it crunched under the tires whenever we pulled slightly off the road to let another car pass, though I didn't see any other cars that night. It felt like we were the only people left in the world, crawling through the dark at 20 miles per hour, looking for animals that didn't want to be seen. I remember I was feeling tired, fighting sleep, and leaning my forehead against the cold window to stay awake. My dad slowed the car down even more, and I thought maybe he had seen a deer, so I sat up straighter and looked out into the field. That's when I saw it, or her. At first it just looked like a shape, like a tree stump or a fence post standing up by itself in the grass. But then as the headlights got closer, I saw it was a person, an old woman. She was wearing what looked like a thick, pinkish wool sweater and maybe a skirt, but the shadows made it hard to tell. She was off the road, standing in the grass maybe 30 yards away. I thought maybe she was holding something in her hand, like a cloth or a bag, but I couldn't see clearly. She was waving her arms slowly, like she was trying to get our attention. My dad kept driving forward a few more feet, then slowed down completely. I felt this cold feeling in my chest, like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water down my back. The way she was standing there felt wrong. The battlefield was empty, wide open, with no lights and no houses around. It was the middle of the night, and there she was, waving at us in the dark. Her hair looked short and thin, almost white or gray, and her posture was bent forward like she was leaning into the cold wind. I felt this urge to slide down in my seat, so she couldn't see me, even though we were far away. Something about her just didn't make sense. She wasn't dressed right for the weather. It was freezing outside. My mom asked my dad what he was doing, and he mumbled something about turning around to get the ranger. I kept looking at her as we rolled past, and in that moment I felt so afraid. I don't even know why. She wasn't doing anything except waving her arm back and forth. But there was no car broken down nearby, no lights, nothing. Just her, standing in the field like she had been there forever. As soon as we passed her, I twisted around in my seat to look out the back window. I could still see her in the red glow of our taillights, her arm moving slower now. She didn't try to come toward the road or follow us. She just stood there in the grass, alone in the darkness. My dad turned the car around at the next pull-off, and I felt panic rise up in my throat. I didn't want to go back that way. I wanted him to drive the other direction and never look back. But he drove back down the same road, past the spot where she had been standing. She was still there, but this time she wasn't waving. She was just standing still, turned a little toward us, and I could see her face in the headlights. Her skin looked pale and sagged, like my great-grandma's did before she died. Her eyes were dark. They didn't shine in the light, they just looked empty. I felt my hands sweating even though the car was freezing. My chest hurt from holding my breath. We drove past her again and kept going until we reached the ranger station. The building was small, like a little shed with a parking lot. The lights were off, but my dad parked and honked until someone came out. A tall man in a uniform walked out looking annoyed, but after my dad spoke to him, his face turned serious. He got in his truck and told us to follow him back down the road. We drove behind him, his bright spotlight shining out over the grass as he moved it left and right. We slowed down when we got close to the spot. The ranger's light moved across the field where she had been standing. There was nothing there. He stopped his truck and got out, walking along the edge of the road, shining his flashlight out into the grass. He moved the light up and down the ditch, then walked farther along the field edge. He even crossed to the other side of the road and checked there. Nothing, just frost-covered grass and silent darkness. I watched him from the car window, my heart hammering so hard it made my head hurt. He got back into his truck and said there was nothing out there. He told my dad he would patrol the area for a bit just in case, but that we should go on home and get some sleep. I didn't want to sleep. I didn't want to go anywhere near my grandparents' house, where the windows faced out into empty fields just like this one. When we got back, I remember standing in my grandparents' driveway, staring out into the trees as my dad unlocked the front door. My breath came out in quick little clouds, and I felt like I could still see her, somewhere far off in the darkness, standing alone. I refused to sleep by the window that night. I pulled my sleeping bag onto the floor and slept next to my sister's bed instead, staring at the ceiling until my eyes burned from staying open too long. Every time a branch scraped against the house, I flinched so hard my teeth clacked together. I kept imagining her out there, walking through the snow in that pink wool sweater, looking up at the window trying to see me through the dark. My heart was beating so hard I felt like it would explode out of my chest. I didn't tell anyone how scared I was. The next morning, everyone acted normal, drinking coffee and talking about plans for Christmas dinner. My grandpa was watching TV and my grandma was baking pies. I sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the empty white yard. I watched the snow falling in small flakes, covering up any footprints that might have been out there. I wondered what would have happened if my dad had stopped the car. What if she had come up to us? What if she had needed help, and we just left her out there alone in the freezing dark? That thought made me feel guilty, but another part of me felt relief that we hadn't stopped. Something about her didn't feel right, and I couldn't shake the fear that washed over me when I saw her face in the headlights. I didn't tell my friends about it when I got back to school after winter break. I didn't talk about it at all for years, but every once in a while, when I was alone in my room at night, I would think about her and feel that same cold dread crawl up my spine. Even now, as an adult, I still remember every detail of that night. I can't tell myself it was a ghost, because ghosts don't make sense to me. It was a person, a real person, standing alone in the battlefield in the middle of winter with no car, no flashlight, no coat, and no bag. Just a pink wool sweater and a wave that didn't feel like asking for help, but like beckoning. That was the night I realized how big and dark the world really is. It showed me that there are things out there that don't make sense, things that happen without explanation, people who appear where they shouldn't be. Even now, decades later, whenever I'm driving on an empty road in the middle of the night and I see someone walking alone, I feel that same chill in my bones. I grip the steering wheel tighter, keep my eyes locked forward, and drive just a little faster until they are gone behind me in the dark. When I was about 5 years old, my dad came home with these wooden clogs one evening. I remember sitting on the worn living room carpet, playing with my little toy cars, when he walked in through the front door. His boots were dusty from work, and his shirt smelled like cigarettes and sweat, like it always did when he came home late. He dropped his lunchbox on the kitchen counter, and then pulled a small plastic bag from under his arm. Inside the bag were these wooden clogs. They were shiny and small, carved out of thick pale wood. Each clog had a bright red painted flower on the top, almost like a tulip or rose, with green leaves spreading around it in a careful circle. They were beautiful in a way, but something about them felt wrong to me, even back then as a little kid. Maybe it was the way they didn't look scuffed or used. They looked brand new, even though my dad said he got them from some old woman on the street. He said she was selling all sorts of little wooden and metal crafts on a folding table set up near the laundromat. He told my mom later that night that when he looked at the woman, he felt something strange, like she was staring right through him. But he ignored it. He always ignored those little feelings. He thought he was being paranoid and saw them as a great deal because she sold him the clogs for just a few bucks. He placed them on the top shelf of the entertainment system. Our entertainment system was this big fake oak thing with 2 glass doors and metal handles. Inside it were old VHS tapes, some of my mom's romance novels, and a pile of random things that never got put away. On top of the unit was the small CRT TV, and above that, on a thick flat shelf, my dad placed the clogs. They sat there, pointed slightly outward like little feet watching the living room. At that time, my dad slept on the couch in the living room. He and my mom weren't sleeping together back then. I never really understood why, but it was normal for me to wake up at night to use the bathroom and see him lying there under his thin blankets, the flicker of the street lamp outside lighting up his face through the blinds. That same night, my older half-brother was staying over too. He was about 15 at the time and slept on the other couch, the one adjacent to my dad's, across the little coffee table that always smelled like stale cola and cigarette ashes. That night, everything felt normal. We ate dinner in front of the TV, watching a rerun of some detective show. My mom went to bed early because she worked the morning shift at the diner. My dad stayed up for a while, smoking a cigarette near the back door with the door cracked open to let the smoke out. My brother played on his Game Boy until the batteries died. I fell asleep on the carpet while playing with my cars, and my dad lifted me into my bed later that night. I woke up just enough to feel his scratchy shirt against my cheek before I drifted back into sleep. I don't know what time it was when everything happened. All I know is I woke up to the sound of my brother screaming. At first, it felt like I was dreaming because his scream sounded far away, muffled like I was underwater. Then I heard this weird noise, like someone grunting or choking, and my eyes flew open. My mom was already rushing past my bedroom door, her feet slapping against the floor. I scrambled out of bed and ran after her. When I stepped into the living room, my dad was off the couch. He wasn't standing or sitting. He was dangling a few inches off the cushions, his back arched upward and his arms flailing at his chest. His sheets were wrapped around his neck, tight enough that the veins on his forehead looked like they would burst. His face was red, almost purple, and his eyes were wide open. His mouth was open too, making this horrible gagging noise as he clawed at the sheets. My brother was standing on the other side of the coffee table, his Game Boy still on the couch where he'd thrown it. He was staring with his mouth open, frozen. My mom lunged forward and tried to pull the sheets off his neck, but they were twisted tight, knotted somehow behind his head. She yelled for me to turn on the lights. I remember my fingers shaking so hard I almost couldn't flip the switch. When the lights came on, everything stopped. The sheets loosened instantly. My dad fell back onto the couch, coughing so hard his whole chest heaved. My mom grabbed the sheets and pulled them completely off him, tossing them to the floor. My brother fell onto his knees, shaking his head, mumbling that he didn't know what was happening. I stood there in my pajamas with my bare feet on the cold linoleum floor, staring up at those wooden clogs sitting on the shelf. My dad couldn't speak for a few minutes. He just lay there gasping. My mom told him he needed to go to the hospital, but he shook his head. He didn't want to go. He said he was fine, just shaken up. But he wasn't fine. None of us were. We sat in the living room with the lights on until the sun came up, not saying much. My brother fell asleep sitting up against the wall. My mom went to make coffee at dawn, her hands trembling so bad she spilled some on the counter. Later that morning, my dad took the clogs down from the shelf. He didn't even look at them for long. He just put them back in the plastic bag and left them on the kitchen table. When my grandma came over for coffee, he told her what happened. She just shook her head and said that things like that only happen in horror movies. She took the clogs anyway. She said they were too nice to throw out, that someone hand-carved them with care, and that it would be a waste to just toss them in the trash. She lived in an apartment building in the South Bronx, a rough area with barred windows and metal doors. She had 5 locks on her front door and a little chain lock that she always used, even when she was just stepping out to check the mail. At night, she locked her bedroom door from the inside. She always told us that people in her building could pick locks, and she didn't trust anyone. She kept a heavy wooden bat by her bed in case anyone ever broke in. A couple of weeks after she took the clogs, she called my mom. She sounded tired, almost scared. She said that every night since she placed the clogs on her TV stand, she heard footsteps in her hallway. They were heavy, like boots on her old wood floors, walking slowly up and down the hall. Sometimes she would hear loud bangs on her bedroom door, like someone slamming their fist against it, hard enough that she saw the doorknob shake. She told us she always got up to check. She'd unlock her door and open it quickly, holding her bat in her hand, expecting to see someone standing there. But every time, there was nothing. The hallway was empty. The door to her apartment was locked with all 5 locks in place, and her windows were still barred from the outside. She even checked the closets and under the table once, thinking maybe she was losing her mind. But there was nothing there, just the clogs sitting on her TV stand, facing slightly outward like they were watching the room. Eventually, she couldn't take it anymore. One morning, after another night of banging and footsteps, she put the clogs in a paper grocery bag and left her apartment before sunrise. She didn't tell us where she put them. She only said she chucked them out. Whether that meant she threw them in the building dumpster or left them on the street for someone else, we never found out. After she got rid of them, the noises stopped. She still locked her door every night, but she said the hallway was quiet again. But my dad never really got over what happened. Even now, all these years later, he still has nightmares of being choked. He told me once that in his dreams, he can't see who or what is choking him. All he knows is that his sheets wrap around his neck tighter and tighter, and no matter how much he tries to scream, nothing comes out. Growing up, I used to think about those clogs a lot. I thought about them whenever I saw people selling little crafts on the street, wondering if anyone else took something home that shouldn't have been moved. I wondered where the clogs ended up, if someone else found them sitting in a gutter and thought they looked beautiful and took them home. I wondered if they ended up in a thrift store, sitting on a dusty shelf next to chipped mugs and broken toys, waiting for someone else to take them. Sometimes, even now, I have dreams of them. I dream I'm standing in my old living room again, looking up at the entertainment system. The wooden clogs are sitting there, angled slightly outward, the red flowers bright under the TV's glow. The house is quiet in my dream, too quiet, and I stand there, frozen, unable to move, listening to the sound of someone breathing behind me, deep and slow, like they're waiting for me to turn around. When I wake up from those dreams, my throat always feels tight. I lie there in the dark, listening to the sounds of the house settling around me. And I remember what happened when I was 5. I remember my dad dangling off the couch, his eyes bulging, his feet kicking against the cushions. I remember my brother's scream and the way my mom's hands shook when she made coffee that morning. And I think about how something as simple as a pair of wooden clogs can change everything, leaving behind memories that never really go away, no matter how many years pass. My dad still talks about it sometimes. He says maybe he just got tangled in the sheets by accident, but when he says it, his voice always cracks a little. I think he wants to believe it was just an accident because the truth is too scary to hold on to. I think my grandma tried to believe it too. But deep down, I know none of us really believed it was an accident. We just had no other explanation that made sense. And that's what scared us the most. Now, as an adult, I keep my home simple. I don't buy old things from the street. I don't bring home trinkets or antiques. I keep my shelves empty except for books and photos of my family. Because every time I see something carved from wood or metal, I think about those clogs and how harmless they looked sitting on that shelf. And I remind myself that not everything beautiful belongs in our homes. Some things are meant to be left alone, exactly where we found them. That was the lesson I learned when I was 5 years old, standing barefoot on the living room floor, staring up at those little wooden shoes with the red flowers painted on them. And it's a lesson I've never forgotten. When I think back to my childhood, there are a lot of things I barely remember. Memories feel like old photos sometimes, colors fading, corners curling, edges getting torn up by time. But there are some moments that feel so clear they might as well have happened yesterday. One of those is the night my grandmother died. I was 2.5 years old. That age where you're just starting to piece together words, where the world is still too big and you're still too small to understand what it all means. I don't remember the night exactly, not in the way my mom tells it. She says I was sleeping in my little room, the one with the pale yellow walls and the thin curtains with blue and green dinosaurs on them. She says my crib was pushed against the far corner, close to the window, so that in the morning the sunlight would shine right onto me when she pulled back the curtains. That night, she says she was sitting on the couch, half watching TV and half thinking about what to make for dinner the next day, when the phone rang. She says it was my aunt, her voice shaking as she told my mom that Grammy was gone. My grandmother had been fighting lung cancer for a while. I know that now, but back then I didn't know what cancer was. I didn't know about hospitals and scans and quiet rooms with chairs lined up against the walls and that sharp alcohol smell that clings to your clothes when you leave. I didn't know about tubes and oxygen tanks and that deep tiredness people get when they've been sick for too long. All I knew was that Grammy was soft hugs and warm cardigans, and the smell of Dove soap mixed with faint cigarette smoke. My mom says she hung up the phone, sat there staring at the dark TV screen, and tried to swallow the lump in her throat. 10 minutes later, I started crying. Not just whimpering like kids do when they shift in their sleep, but a deep sobbing. She rushed into my room and found me standing up in my crib, tears running down my face, my little hands gripping the rail. She asked me what was wrong, and she says I looked up at her with red puffy eyes and told her, Grammy went to live with the angels. She says she just stood there, staring at me, her heart breaking open all over again. I've heard this story so many times, at family gatherings, at Christmas dinners, whenever someone talks about Grammy. And every time, I just smile awkwardly and nod, not sure how to react. Because part of me thinks, maybe I heard someone say it. Maybe I heard her talking to my dad, or maybe I was dreaming. Kids pick up words from everywhere, and grief makes people remember things differently. For years, I just let it be one of those stories families tell. I never thought too deeply about it. But then 17 years later, when I was 19, something happened that still sits heavy in my chest every time I think about it. My grandfather, my mom's dad, was old and tired by then. After Grammy died, he'd stayed in the same house they'd always lived in, the small white house with the peeling green shutters and the old lilac bushes out front. He still sat in the same chair by the window, still watered the same row of tomato plants in the summer, still drank his cup of black coffee at 5 in the morning before anyone else was awake. But after Grammy died, it was like his spark slowly faded out. He still smiled when we visited. He still hugged me tight. But his eyes were tired, and he moved slower every year. When I was little, I'd crawl up into his lap, and he'd bounce me on his knee and tell me about his old job fixing up cars. He used to be a mechanic back in the 60s and 70s, back when cars were big and boxy and loud, and every man he knew worked with his hands. That summer, the summer he died, I was staying in my college dorm for a few weeks to take an extra course. I remember my room was so small you could touch both walls if you stretched your arms out. I had a twin bed with stiff sheets, a squeaky metal frame desk, and a tiny window that looked out at a brick wall. It was hot that week, the kind of heat that makes the air thick, and the small fan on my dresser just pushed the hot air around instead of cooling it. That night, I fell asleep early. I had been studying all day, reading through long chapters that made my eyes blur. I remember it was around 10 when I turned off the light. And then I had a dream. It felt so real I can still feel the way the dry wind stung my cheeks. In the dream, my grandfather and I were sitting in a bright red 1960 Cadillac Eldorado convertible. The top was down, and we were driving along a long empty road that stretched out into the desert. I could see pale brown sand and dark scrub bushes on either side. In the distance there were flat mesas, burnt orange under the blazing sun, and the sky was cloudless and so bright it hurt to look at. The air was hot, dry, whipping my hair back behind me. I was sitting in the passenger seat, and he was driving. His wrinkled hands gripped the huge steering wheel, and he looked so peaceful, staring straight ahead at the road. He wasn't young in the dream. He was exactly as I last saw him, old and lined with spots on his thin hands, but his eyes were bright, and he looked happy. More alive than I'd seen him in years. We didn't talk in the dream. We just drove, the big red car rumbling along the cracked highway, the white lines passing under us in a steady rhythm. I could hear the low hum of the engine, the soft whistle of wind past the open windows, the rustle of my hair. The dashboard was sun-bleached, with thin cracks running along it. I could smell warm leather and dust. It felt like we were driving forever, just the two of us, with nothing ahead but road and sky. When I woke up, the dream was still clinging to me like a film of sweat on my skin. I didn't think much of it at first. I just lay there, staring at the gray ceiling, feeling that strange heavy quiet you get after a dream, so vivid it almost hurts to let it go. Then my phone buzzed. It was my mom. Her message was short. "Call me when you wake up. Grandpa passed away last night." I remember just staring at the words, reading them again and again. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't take a full breath. I sat up in bed and put my feet on the cold floor, feeling the rough carpet against my toes, trying to ground myself. Then I called her, my hands shaking so bad I could barely press the buttons. She told me he died in his sleep, peaceful, in his own bed. The hospice nurse said he hadn't been in pain. Later that day, I went to the hospital with my mom to collect some of his things. I remember walking down those long hospital halls, the ones that smell like bleach and sickness, the floors so shiny you can see your reflection. I was quiet most of the time, staring down at my shoes. I was wearing my old black sneakers, the ones with the hole in the toe. My mom was talking to a nurse about paperwork, and I just stood there, feeling small and useless. When we finally left, walking back out into the blazing sun, I told her about the dream. I don't know why I told her. Maybe I just needed to say it out loud to make sense of it. I told her about the car, the color, the desert, the road that went on forever. She stopped walking, turned to me, and her eyes filled with tears. She said that Grandpa had always wanted to drive a convertible down Route 66, that he'd mentioned it so many times when he was younger. She said he used to talk about it with Grammy, how one day they'd rent a big old Cadillac, put the top down, and drive through New Mexico with the sun on their faces and nothing to worry about. I didn't know what to say. We just stood there, cars pulling in and out of the parking lot, the hot wind blowing grit across the pavement. My shirt was sticking to my back with sweat, and I felt like I was floating slightly above my own body, like none of it was really happening. It's been a few years since then. I still think about that dream. Sometimes, late at night, lying awake in the dark, I try to remember every detail. The sound of the engine, the smell of sun-baked leather, the way the light hit his face. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in angels sitting on clouds or people floating around watching us. But I do believe that there are connections between people that run deeper than anything we can understand. Bonds that tie us together even when we're far apart, even when one of us is gone. I don't know why I had that dream. Maybe my brain was just trying to comfort itself, to give me an image that felt peaceful, so that his death didn't feel so sharp and cold. Maybe I remembered something he'd said once about Route 66, and it floated up from the back of my mind while I slept. Or maybe dreams are just dreams, meaningless pictures flickering in the dark. But when I think about that drive, I don't feel sad. I feel warm. I feel the sun on my face, the dry wind tangling my hair, the road humming beneath us. And I see him there next to me, quiet and calm, finally doing something he'd always wanted to do. In the end, I think that's what matters. Not whether dreams mean anything, or if kids know things they shouldn't. What matters is that when I close my eyes, I can still see him there, driving that big red Cadillac down a long empty road, with nothing but blue sky above and open desert ahead. And when I think about that, I feel like wherever he is, he's okay. And that makes me okay too. I woke up before sunrise because I couldn't sleep properly. My back was sore from the thin mattress I had thrown on the floor last night. I lived in a rented basement apartment for a while now. It wasn't bad, but the dampness and the smell of old concrete always bothered me. That morning, I decided I'd finally clean the storage area that came with the apartment. It was just a small room attached to my main living space, about the size of a closet, but it always smelled worse than the rest of the basement. I put on my slippers and an old hoodie because the air was chilly. I grabbed my phone for light. The bulb in the storage room had burned out months ago, and I never cared to replace it. I unlocked the door. The door itself was swollen from moisture and stuck a bit, so I had to pull hard. The smell hit me right away. It smelled like wet dirt mixed with mold, and something sour that made my stomach twist a little. I turned on my phone torch and pointed it inside. The walls were plain cement with stains running down from the corners. There were boxes stacked to the side, some paint cans, old tools, and my spare chairs. I stepped inside and started moving things out into the living room so I could sweep and mop the floor. As I was moving the boxes, I noticed the floor was damp under one of them. I bent down and ran my hand over it. My fingers came back black with dirt. I wiped them on my pants and tried to ignore the uneasy feeling building in my chest. I moved the box aside completely. That's when I noticed there was a thin crack running along the floor from the wall towards the center. It wasn't big, just enough to slip a credit card into it. I didn't think much of it because old basements crack all the time. I continued cleaning. I swept up piles of dirt, dead bugs, bits of rusted nails, and scraps of cardboard that had rotted off the bottom of the boxes. As I swept near the crack, I noticed small bits of what looked like shredded plastic. I thought maybe mice had dragged garbage in through a hole somewhere, so I searched along the base of the walls to see if there was an opening. But there wasn't. The walls were old but solid. I kept sweeping, not wanting to think too hard about it. After sweeping, I filled a bucket with warm, soapy water and started mopping the floor, trying to scrub away the smell. As I pushed the mop back and forth, the crack seemed to widen just slightly under pressure. I crouched down to look at it closer. The smell coming from it was terrible, like rotten eggs and damp earth mixed together. I gagged and pulled my shirt over my nose. I poked at the crack with the end of the mop handle. It crumbled a little around the edges. I felt my chest tighten with discomfort, but I kept digging into it, thinking maybe I could widen it enough to pour bleach or something down to kill the smell. As I chipped away, a small section broke off, and suddenly I saw darkness under the floor. At first it looked like a black hole in the concrete, but when I leaned closer with my phone light, I realized it was a small hollow space beneath the slab. I couldn't see the bottom, only darkness. My heart was beating faster now. I didn't want to look anymore, but my curiosity was stronger than my fear. I chipped away more, making a hole the size of my fist. Cold air rushed up and hit my face, carrying a smell so strong it made my eyes water. I pulled back and took a deep breath through my shirt. I thought maybe a dead animal was under there. I went to my tool bag and got a small crowbar and started prying chunks of the floor away. The cement was old and brittle. Within minutes, I had cleared a hole about the size of a dinner plate. I pointed my phone light down. There was a space of about 2 feet deep, like a shallow pit or crawl space, but the floor of it wasn't dirt or gravel. It was something dark, soft-looking, and uneven. I felt sick to my stomach because the smell coming up was thick and sweet and rotten all at once. My brain was telling me to stop, to cover it back up, but my hands kept digging pieces of cement out to see more. I widened it enough to stick my head in a little. I shone my phone around. The floor below was covered in black trash bags. Some were torn open, and I could see clumps of something pale sticking out. At first my brain refused to make sense of it. Then I realized it looked like old meat. like the freezer-burned meat my grandmother used to throw out, dry and pale gray with some darker patches. My throat closed up, and I almost vomited. I stood up and backed away from the hole, breathing hard. My chest hurt from how fast my heart was beating. I stood there for a long time, staring at the hole, feeling the cold air rising from it wrap around my ankles. My mind was trying to come up with explanations. Maybe it was animal meat. Maybe the landlord was a hunter and buried scraps under the floor for some reason. But there were too many bags. Too many torn open pieces showing pale gray flesh. Some pieces looked too large to be an animal. I felt dizzy. I sat down on one of the storage boxes in the living room, trying to calm down. My brain felt foggy, like I was half asleep and having a nightmare. After a while, I forced myself to stand up. I went back to the hole and looked again. My phone battery was low, so the torch kept dimming. I shoved the mop handle into the bags to see how deep they went. It sank in easily, about 2 feet down, before hitting something solid. When I pulled it back out, it smelled horrible. There were small pieces of pale gray matter stuck to it. I dropped the mop and stepped back quickly. My knees felt weak. I stumbled out of the storage room and closed the door behind me, locking it again, even though there was no reason to lock it. I sat down on my couch, staring at the wall for what felt like hours. I couldn't think clearly. My stomach hurt so bad I felt like I would throw up at any second. My mind kept repeating the same thought over and over. It was human. Those were bodies. There's no other explanation. I didn't know what to do. If I called the police, I would be involved in something I didn't understand. What if they thought I did it? What if whoever put them there found out I had seen them? I couldn't stop shaking. The thought of sleeping there that night made my chest tighten so badly I could barely breathe. I grabbed my backpack, shoved in some clothes, my phone charger, wallet, and left the apartment without looking back. I drove straight to my brother's house 2 towns over. I didn't tell him anything. I just said I needed to stay a few days. That night I lay awake on his couch, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the cold air from that hole brushing against my face, thinking about how many bags were down there, wondering who they were, wondering if they had been buried there before I moved in, or if someone was still using that hole. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every car passing by made my chest clench. The next morning I woke up early. I sat at the kitchen table drinking cold coffee, thinking about what to do. I thought about moving out quietly, never telling anyone what I saw. I thought about calling the landlord and screaming at him to tell me what was under my floor. But in the end, I knew what I had to do. I called the police and told them everything. They came and taped off the entire basement. They asked me to stay in town for questioning. They didn't tell me details, but I could see on their faces when they came out that it was as bad as I thought. Worse, maybe. There were news vans outside my apartment by noon. People were calling me nonstop when they saw my building on the news. They said it had been going on for years. They arrested my landlord later that day. Apparently, he owned 3 other buildings. I didn't ask what they found in those. I didn't want to know. For weeks after, I couldn't sleep properly. I kept seeing the black bags under the floor every time I closed my eyes. I couldn't stay in that town anymore. I packed my things and moved states away. Even now, I can't live in basement apartments. I can't stand the smell of damp concrete. Every creak in the night makes my chest tighten. When I close my eyes, I still feel the cold air from that hole on my face, carrying the smell of rot, reminding me of what was hidden under my feet all those nights I slept in that room, never knowing what lay just below me. I never really liked driving at night, but sometimes I had no choice. I worked in a small town about 60 miles away from where I lived, and when overtime calls came in, there was no point arguing. That evening, it was almost 9 p.m. by the time I finished my paperwork, turned off the computers, and locked the office door behind me. I remember feeling tired and hungry, with only half a bottle of warm water in my bag. The parking lot was dimly lit by a single flickering light over the entrance. The air smelled like hot concrete cooling down after a summer day. I unlocked my car, tossed my bag on the passenger seat, and sat there for a few seconds, staring at the dashboard, trying to keep my eyes open. I had at least an hour's drive on those narrow rural highways before I reached home. I backed out slowly, feeling the crunch of loose gravel under my tires, and pulled onto the main road. It was empty as usual, except for the dark fields on both sides stretching endlessly. My headlights carved a narrow tunnel through the darkness. After 20 minutes of silent driving, with the radio off and windows slightly down to keep myself awake, I noticed something odd up ahead. At first it looked like a small dark shape on the right side of the road. As I got closer, I realized it was a bicycle lying half in the gravel shoulder and half in the tall grass. Its wheels were still spinning slowly, as if it had just fallen over. I slowed down and passed it carefully, glancing in my rearview mirror, but I didn't see anyone. I told myself someone probably left it there and walked home, or it had fallen from a passing truck. Still, something about it bothered me. I drove another 5 minutes, my mind drifting in and out, thinking about the leftover rice in my fridge, wondering if I should stop for gas even though I had half a tank. Then I saw another shape ahead. This time it was a long piece of wood or metal, I couldn't tell. It was lying diagonally across my lane. I braked hard and swerved slightly to avoid it, feeling my tires slide a little on the rough road. My heart jumped. I looked back in the mirror. Just a plank of wood or an iron rod, lying there in the middle of nowhere. I felt angry for a moment, thinking of some careless construction truck driver. I drove on, gripping the wheel tightly, suddenly feeling wide awake. After another mile or so, I saw what looked like a bag or sack on the left shoulder, then a broken bucket, then a plastic crate. Every few hundred yards there was something else. My stomach felt tight. I didn't understand what was going on. The road was empty, straight, flat, and there were no houses or shops along that stretch. Just dry grass, thorn bushes, barbed wire fences, and darkness. I slowed down even more, driving at 40 instead of 65, scanning the road ahead carefully. The moon was bright, giving the fields a pale glow. I remember thinking maybe some truck lost its load, and things were dropping off slowly along the way. Then I saw it. It took me a second to realize what I was seeing. In the middle of my lane, maybe 100 feet ahead, there was a small shape standing upright. My chest tightened instantly. I slowed to a crawl, headlights shining directly at it. It was a child's car seat. A dark gray baby seat, sitting there perfectly straight, like someone had placed it down carefully. I stopped the car completely, my engine idling softly. I stared at the seat. There was no baby in it, just empty harness straps dangling down. I felt an overwhelming sense of fear that I couldn't explain. I sat there breathing hard, gripping the steering wheel, feeling sweat forming on my neck despite the cool air blowing from the vent. I didn't want to get out. Every cell in my body told me not to open the door. I reached over and locked all the doors without thinking. I drove around it slowly, my eyes darting from the baby seat to the tall grass on either side of the road, half expecting to see someone crouched there watching me. But there was no one, just the silent empty fields and the warm summer breeze rustling the dry grass. I drove on, feeling my heart pounding harder each mile. After a few minutes, I saw faint red lights ahead. My first thought was relief. Maybe a police car or another driver stopped on the side. As I got closer, I realized it was a pickup truck parked on the shoulder with its hazards blinking. Its tailgate was down, and there were boxes and bags scattered near it. I slowed down to almost a stop as I passed. The driver door was open, but no one was inside. The headlights were off, only the hazards blinking in the dark. The engine wasn't running. It looked abandoned, but fresh, like it had just been left there. I kept driving. My chest felt tight, and my arms were trembling slightly on the wheel. I started to hear my own breathing echoing in my head. I kept glancing in the mirrors, expecting to see headlights behind me or someone walking in the darkness along the shoulder, but there was nothing. Then the road curved to the right, and I entered a small wooded area. The trees grew close to the shoulder, branches hanging over the road, making it darker than before. My headlights illuminated only a narrow strip ahead, with shadows flickering across the trunks. Halfway through the woods, my headlights landed on something that made my entire body freeze. On the right side of the road, almost leaning against a tree, was a man. He was wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. His head was down, but covering his face, arms hanging limp at his sides. I drove past him slowly. I couldn't see his face. He didn't move at all, just stood there, facing the tree, head down. I kept driving, gripping the wheel so hard my fingers hurt. I didn't even breathe for a moment. I felt an instinctive fear, so strong it made my vision tunnel. I wanted to drive as fast as I could, but my body wouldn't let me. My foot was heavy on the accelerator, but my hand was shaking. I drove out of the woods and back onto open road, moonlight flooding the fields again. I drove for another 15 minutes without seeing anything unusual. No cars, no lights, no animals crossing the road. My mind kept replaying the image of that man standing motionless under the tree. Why was he there at night? What was all that junk scattered along the road for the last 10 miles? Why the baby seat? The abandoned truck? Finally, I saw the green sign for the exit to my town. My arms felt numb as I turned off the highway and drove through the empty streets, past dark houses and sleeping shops. I reached my apartment, parked under the dim street lamp, and just sat there with the engine running, staring at my hands. They were trembling hard now. I turned off the ignition and listened to the ticking of the cooling engine. My chest hurt from holding my breath so many times during the drive. When I got out, the night air felt cold on my damp skin. I grabbed my bag and walked up to my apartment without looking back. My front door felt heavier than usual as I pushed it open. I locked it behind me, checked the windows, turned on every light. I stood in the kitchen drinking water straight from the bottle, feeling my throat burn with dryness. My mind was racing with every detail I saw on that road. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly avoided something terrible, something I couldn't explain. That night, I slept with the light on in my room for the first time in years. Even though my body was exhausted, my mind stayed alert, listening for sounds outside, headlights flashing through the blinds, someone walking up the stairs. I woke up dozens of times, heart pounding, checking my phone for the time. I didn't dream that night. Just darkness each time I drifted off, and then the sudden jolt of waking up in terror without knowing why. The next morning, as I sat at my kitchen table staring at my cold cup of coffee, I felt a strange certainty inside me. A deep knowing that if I had stopped for the baby seat, or if I had gotten out to check the abandoned truck, or if I had spoken to the man under the tree, something bad would have happened to me. I didn't know what exactly, but I felt it in my bones. I never took that route again. I started leaving work before dark, refusing overtime, even if it meant losing hours. I couldn't force myself to drive that road again at night. Even now, years later, when I think about it, my chest tightens and I feel that same silent warning inside me. Because I knew deep down that someone was setting up traps that night, and I was just lucky enough not to be one of the people who stopped. I woke up before sunrise that morning, feeling that restless kind of energy I sometimes get when I know I'll be alone all day. My friend had asked me to house sit for him while he and his wife went to visit her parents in another city. Their place was out in the country, down a dirt road that cut off from the highway and wound through a few miles of thick trees and fields before opening up to their property. They didn't really have neighbors close by, just a few farms spread out far in the distance. It was peaceful out there, a good place to clear my head. That first morning I made myself coffee and stepped out onto their back deck. The air was still, and a thin layer of fog sat over the field behind the house. Their yard sloped down into a tree line about 100 yards away, a thick patch of woods that ran all along the back of their property. I sat there for a while, listening to birds waking up, sipping my coffee slowly, feeling the cool, damp air on my skin. Around mid-morning, I decided to walk the property line to get familiar with it. They told me I could explore as much as I wanted. I slipped on my boots and walked out past the shed, down toward the trees. The grass was wet with dew, soaking the cuffs of my jeans. The smell of dirt and wet grass was strong, mixed with a faint smell of something rotting. I figured it was just old leaves piled up along the edge of the woods. When I reached the trees, I stopped and listened for a while. Everything felt quiet there, like the trees swallowed up all the sound. I could hear my own breathing and the faint beat of my heart. I walked in slowly, following an old trail that looked like it hadn't been used in a long time. Branches hung low over the path, brushing my shoulders and face as I moved forward. The ground was soft under my boots, damp and covered in old leaves. I kept walking, deeper into the woods. The air felt colder there. I noticed a strong smell again, that same rotting smell I caught earlier, but stronger this time. I looked around, thinking maybe a deer had died somewhere nearby, but I didn't see anything. The smell seemed to come and go as I moved. I kept walking, trying not to focus on it. The trail curved and dipped down into a little gully, then rose up again. At the top of the rise, I stopped to catch my breath. The trees opened up a bit there, letting in more light. I stood there for a while, just listening. I could hear birds in the distance and the faint rustle of leaves high up in the trees, but there was something else mixed in with the sounds. A faint creaking sound, like wood bending under weight. I turned my head, trying to figure out where it came from, but it faded away. I walked further, pushing through a thick patch of young trees. On the other side, I found myself in a small clearing. There was an old wooden structure there, almost hidden by the trees growing up around it. It looked like a deer stand or an old hunting blind, with pieces of wood nailed together in a rough square about 8 feet off the ground. The boards were gray and splintered with age, and half of it was leaning to one side like it might fall at any moment. I walked around it, looking up. It didn't look safe to climb, but I could see there were still a few old boards nailed across the tree like a ladder. I stood there for a while, staring at it. That creaking sound came back, soft but clear, and I realized it was coming from the deer stand, the wood shifting under its own weight in the breeze. The smell of rot was stronger here, thick and sour. I walked around, scanning the ground. Behind the stand, half covered by leaves and broken branches, I saw the ribcage of a deer picked clean, bleached white by sun and rain. The skull was missing. The bones looked old but not ancient. I stood staring at it for a long time, feeling uneasy in a way I couldn't explain. I decided to head back to the house. As I walked, I kept glancing behind me, feeling like something was there. The woods felt silent again, like the air had gone still and heavy. My footsteps sounded too loud. When I reached the tree line and stepped out into the open field, I felt a rush of relief wash over me. I walked back to the house, boots caked in mud, jeans damp up to my knees. That evening I sat on the deck again, watching the sun go down. The sky turned dark purple, and then black. Crickets and frogs started up their chorus around the property, and the woods faded into darkness. I felt calm again, but tired. I went inside, locked the doors, and decided to shower before bed. I slept deeply that night, but woke up suddenly around 3 a.m. It was dead quiet in the house, no sound at all. I lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling a strange heaviness in my chest. After a while I realized I needed water, so I got up and walked to the kitchen. As I passed by the sliding glass door that led onto the deck, I noticed something strange. The motion light outside was on. I stopped and stared out into the yard. The light cast a wide pale glow out onto the grass, but beyond it everything was pitch black. My eyes adjusted slowly. I couldn't see anything moving, no animal or person. The field looked empty. I filled my glass with water and stood there drinking it slowly, staring out into the yard. Just before I turned away, I saw something move at the edge of the light. It was quick, like a shadow shifting. My heart thumped hard in my chest. I pressed my face closer to the glass, trying to see. The light flicked off then, leaving everything in darkness. I stood there for a long time, waiting to see if it would come back on, but it didn't. I finally walked back to my room, feeling my skin crawl with that prickling fear you get when you know you're alone, but it feels like you aren't. I lay awake for hours, listening for any sound. Nothing came. The next day I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was just a deer or a raccoon. I spent most of the day inside, only stepping out to bring in some firewood stacked along the side of the house. When I walked around to the woodpile, I saw fresh prints in the mud. They weren't boots or shoes. They looked barefoot, wide at the front and narrow at the heel, pressed deep into the soft ground. My stomach turned when I realized they came from the direction of the woods and led straight to the back deck. I walked back inside quickly, locked the door, and sat down at the kitchen table. I stared out the window for a long time, trying to calm my breathing. I didn't know what to think. Maybe someone was living out there in the woods, moving around at night. It wasn't unheard of. I'd read stories about squatters or hermits living on people's property without them ever knowing. That night I didn't sleep. I stayed up with the lights on, sitting in the living room with a heavy wrench from the garage beside me. Every little creak in the house made my heart jump. Around midnight, the motion light clicked on again. I walked slowly to the window and looked out. At first I didn't see anything. The yard was empty. But then I saw it, standing just at the edge of the light, facing the house. It was a man, naked from what I could tell, covered in dirt and mud. His hair was long and matted, hanging down over his face. He was standing perfectly still, arms hanging at his sides. I froze, staring at him, feeling sick with fear. He didn't move. He just stood there, staring at the house, not even shifting his weight. I backed away slowly and grabbed my phone, ready to call the police. But I stopped. What would I say? That there was a naked man standing in the yard in the middle of the night. By the time they arrived, he would be gone. I walked back to the window. He was still there, in the exact same spot, not moving. I sat down on the floor, hidden from view, heart racing so hard I felt dizzy. After what felt like hours, I crawled back up to peek. The light had gone off. The yard was empty again. At dawn, I finally fell asleep on the couch. When I woke up, the sun was high, and I felt numb and exhausted. I walked out to the deck, looking for any sign he'd been there, but the grass was untouched. I walked down to the spot where he stood. The grass was flattened there, pressed down into the mud. I knelt down, looking closer. There were footprints in the mud, bare feet, the same as by the woodpile. They led back into the woods. That day I packed up my stuff and left early. I called my friend later and told him I had to leave for a family thing. I didn't tell him what I saw. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding crazy. He called me back a few days later after he got home, asking if I noticed anything weird around the property. He said some of his tools from the shed were missing, and there were strange footprints around the back deck. I told him to call the police and left it at that. I still think about it sometimes, that man standing there in the yard, watching the house all night. Sometimes I wake up in the dark, thinking about those woods, wondering how long he'd been living out there, wondering if he'd ever come closer to the house without anyone knowing. I try not to think about what he wanted or why he was there. But every time I think of it, I feel that same heavy fear sink into my chest, like something cold and dark settling deep inside me that I can never shake off completely. I was never a fan of driving at night, especially through the back roads that cut between the small towns in my area. But that day I had no choice. I left work late after covering for a co-worker's shift, and by the time I stopped for fuel and some cheap coffee, it was already past 11. I didn't want to take the highway because it meant going 20 miles out of the way. The shortcut was a two-lane road that wound through thick forest for about 15 miles before connecting back to the main road near my town. I had driven it a few times before during the day, and it was quiet with barely any traffic, only a few houses spread out, hidden behind long gravel driveways and trees. At night it was pitch dark, and the only lights came from my headlights reflecting off the endless rows of pines on either side. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and I remember feeling a bit uneasy, but I tried to ignore it. I just wanted to get home, shower, and crawl into bed. About 10 minutes into that road, I saw something move in the trees to my right. At first, I thought it was just the reflection of my headlights bouncing off branches as the car moved. But then I caught a clearer glimpse. It was the shape of a person, standing back from the road, but still visible between the tree trunks. I felt my chest tighten for a second. It's not normal to see someone out there at night. I slowed down a little, squinting to see if they needed help, but the figure didn't step forward or wave. They just stood there, completely still, almost hidden by the darkness. I drove on, telling myself maybe it was a hunter or someone from one of the hidden houses, but it bothered me how they were just standing there, not moving at all. A mile or two later, I checked my phone. No signal. I placed it back on the passenger seat and tried to calm down, sipping my now lukewarm coffee. The road twisted left and then right again, with tall trees leaning over from both sides, almost forming a tunnel. Then I saw another shape, this time on the left side. It looked exactly the same as the first, the dark outline of a person standing among the trees, a little back from the road, not moving. My chest felt tight again. I felt like my stomach dropped somewhere into my feet. I drove past quickly, but looked into my rearview mirror and saw nothing behind me except the red glow of my taillights fading into darkness. My breathing was getting heavier, and my grip on the steering wheel was tight enough to make my knuckles ache. I kept trying to think logically. Maybe it was just my imagination or tired eyes seeing shapes in the trees. I turned the radio on to distract myself, but the only stations I could get were static or country music playing slow, sad songs about lost love. I turned it off again. I preferred silence to those songs. A few minutes later, the road straightened out for a good stretch. I could see far ahead with my high beams on. That's when I saw a third figure, standing closer to the edge of the road this time, near where the trees thinned out for a small gravel path that probably led to one of those hidden houses. My hands felt cold and sweaty at the same time. The figure was facing the road, facing me as I approached, but I couldn't see details, just the dark outline of a person standing straight, arms down at their sides. I didn't slow down this time. I kept driving, staring ahead, not wanting to look at them as I passed. I felt a shiver crawl down my neck. something felt wrong. Very wrong. I started thinking about how long this road was. I tried to remember the next turnoff or landmark to make sure I knew where I was, but everything looked the same in the dark. Just endless trees, the narrow strip of gray road, and the faint glow of my dashboard lights. After a few more minutes, I realized I was driving faster than I should have been, but I didn't want to ease off the gas. I just wanted to get off that road as soon as possible. That's when I saw headlights approaching in the distance. I felt a small sense of relief. Another car on that road at night was rare, but it meant there was someone else out there. As we got closer, I dimmed my high beams, and they did the same. We passed each other quickly, just a flash of their headlights washing over my face, and then darkness again in my rearview mirror. A moment later, as their lights faded behind me, I saw movement ahead on the side of the road again. My chest tightened so hard it almost hurt. It was another figure, standing right at the edge of the asphalt this time. I gripped the wheel, staring straight ahead as I passed them. My eyes caught the outline for just a second. They were standing sideways this time, facing into the trees, as if they were about to step into them, but completely still. I kept driving, my heart thudding so hard I felt it in my throat. My breathing was shallow, and I felt a faint buzzing in my ears. I realized my mouth was dry, so I reached for my coffee, but my hand was shaking so much I almost spilled it. I placed it back into the cup holder and tried to calm myself down. I kept thinking maybe it was just my tired mind, seeing tree stumps or broken signs and thinking they were people. But deep down I didn't believe that. They looked too real. I don't know how long I drove like that, feeling like I was being watched from the trees on both sides. Every time my headlights moved across a thick clump of trees, I felt like I'd see another person standing there, hidden just behind the trunks. My shoulders were tense, and my lower back started to ache from how stiff I was sitting. Finally, I saw the reflective sign of the upcoming intersection that would connect me back to the main road near my town. I almost cried from relief. I slowed down, checked both ways even though no one was coming at that hour, and turned onto the wider road, heading home. But even as I left that forest road behind, I felt a chill that wouldn't go away. My mind kept going back to those figures, wondering who they were and why they were standing there in the dark doing nothing. I tried to think of logical explanations. Hunters waiting for deer, people looking for lost pets, kids pulling a prank. But something about how they stood there so still, not moving at all, made my skin crawl. When I finally reached my street, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The familiar houses, streetlights, and parked cars felt like safety. I pulled into my driveway, turned off the car, and sat there for a moment, letting my shaking hands calm down before grabbing my coffee cup and getting out. The warm, humid air of the summer night hit my face. I could hear crickets and distant dogs barking. I looked up at the sky. The moon was starting to peek out from behind the clouds. Inside, I locked the door behind me and went straight to the bathroom. I felt like I needed to wash away the cold sweat that had built up on my skin. The hot shower helped a little, and when I lay down in bed, I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just my imagination, or maybe some prank by bored kids. But even now, days later, when I drive past that road during the day, I feel a deep chill inside me. I look into the trees, half expecting to see them again, standing there, watching. I keep thinking about how they didn't move. Not one of them flinched or stepped back as my headlights lit them up. They just stood there, completely still like mannequins, not reacting to the bright light, not shielding their eyes or stepping back. That's what scares me the most. If they were just people, why would they be standing there like that in the dark, in the middle of nowhere, with no cars parked nearby, no flashlights, no reflective gear, no sign they were walking or hiking, just standing there, watching the road, watching the cars that passed by. Since that night, I haven't taken that shortcut again. Even if I get off work late and have to drive an extra 20 miles, I stick to the highway. I tell myself it's just safer, with wider lanes and more cars in case anything happens. But the truth is, I don't think I can handle seeing them again, standing there in the dark forest, silent and still, as if waiting for something I don't want to know about. Every time I close my eyes to sleep, I see them again, those dark shapes by the trees, and I feel that tight, cold fear spreading in my chest. I don't think it will ever fully go away. I never really liked working late, but that day I had no choice. It was already past 10 p.m. when I left the office. My boss asked me to finish some reports, and by the time I walked out into the parking lot, it was empty except for my old silver car sitting under the dim light. The air felt heavy and still, with no wind, and everything seemed too quiet for that time of night. I got into my car and started driving home. I took the highway for about 15 minutes, then turned off into a smaller road that cut through empty fields and a patch of woods. That road always made me feel uneasy at night. There were no streetlights, only the car headlights showing the cracked old asphalt and the edges of tall grass swaying in the dark. My phone's battery had died at work, so I didn't even have music. Just the engine's sound, the tires on the road, and my breathing. About 5 minutes down that road, I saw something on the side. It looked like a car with its hazard lights blinking. As I got closer, I saw it was an old red sedan pulled slightly off the road with the back tire flat. There was someone standing next to it, waving slowly. I felt that drop in my stomach. A part of me wanted to keep driving, pretend I didn't see them. But then I thought about how I'd feel if I was stranded out there alone in the dark. So I slowed down and stopped my car a few feet ahead. I left my headlights on so I could see better. When I got out, I could see it was a man, probably in his late 30s or early 40s. He looked rough, like he'd been working outside all day, wearing jeans and a dark hoodie. His hood was up so I couldn't really see his face well, but he was staring right at me. I asked if he needed help, but he just nodded once and pointed to his flat tire. I walked over and looked at it. The rubber was completely shredded. I told him he'd need to call a tow truck, but he shook his head slowly, almost like he was annoyed. I offered him my phone before remembering it was dead. He didn't say anything, just stood there staring at me. That feeling in my chest got worse. It felt like there was something pressing down on me, warning me to leave. I backed away a little, feeling the urge to get back in my car and go. But then he turned and opened his back door. I thought maybe he was looking for his own phone or tools, but instead he just stood there for a second, then leaned in like he was grabbing something. I couldn't see what he was doing because it was so dark beyond my headlights. Then he stepped aside, and I saw there was someone sitting in the back seat. At first I thought it was a child because the figure looked small, hunched forward with long dark hair covering their face. My mind tried to process it, thinking maybe it was his daughter or wife. But the way they were sitting wasn't right. They weren't moving at all. Their arms just hung down limp at their sides, had bent forward unnaturally. I took a step back without thinking. The man slowly turned back to me, and that's when I saw his face better. There was nothing particularly scary about how he looked. He just had that expression people get when they're completely calm, but their eyes are empty. He closed the car door without a word and turned toward me, taking a single step forward. Every part of my body told me to run, so I did. I turned so fast I almost tripped, scrambled back into my car, slammed the door shut, and locked it. My hands were shaking as I started the engine and pulled away as fast as I could without spinning out in the gravel. In my rearview mirror, I saw him standing there in the middle of the road watching me, his hood still up, arms hanging at his sides. He didn't try to chase me. He just stood there until he disappeared into the darkness behind my car. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I kept driving without stopping, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. The road felt like it went on forever, like I was trapped in it. But eventually I saw the glow of streetlights ahead and the familiar turn into my neighborhood. I drove straight home, parked in my driveway, and sat in the car for a long time, staring at the garage door. My legs felt weak. My whole body felt weak. When I finally got inside, I locked every door and window, pulled the curtains shut, and sat on the couch in silence, feeling like I had just avoided something terrible without even fully understanding what it was. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept seeing the way that figure sat in the back seat, head down, hair covering their face, and how the man looked at me like he wasn't seeing me at all, just looking through me. The next morning I woke up feeling like it had been a dream. I almost convinced myself it was. But when I checked my car later, I noticed dirt smeared along the passenger side door, like someone had brushed against it with muddy clothes. That's when it hit me that I could have been robbed, attacked, or killed out there in the dark if I had stayed any longer. Or maybe it was worse than that, and I didn't want to know. I didn't tell anyone for a while because it felt stupid to say I was scared of a man with a flat tire. But the feeling in my chest that night wasn't just fear, it was something deeper. It was like my body knew before my mind did that something was wrong with him, with the car, with whoever was in the back seat. It was the same feeling you get when you're walking in the woods and you hear a branch crack behind you. or when you're swimming and something brushes your leg underwater. After that night, I never stopped for anyone again on that road. It's not that I don't care about people stranded at night. I do, but there are things you feel deep inside that you can't explain, and you learn to listen to them. Because sometimes what you see isn't the whole truth. Sometimes it's just bait, and if you're unlucky enough to take it, no one ever finds out what really happened to you. I still drive that road sometimes, but only in the day. Even then, I find myself checking every car I pass, half expecting to see that red sedan again, with him standing there in the sunlight, hood up, staring at me with those empty eyes. Every time I see an old car on the side of the road, my stomach drops a little and my hands go cold. I think about that figure in the back seat often. I wonder if they were alive or dead, if they needed help, or if they were part of whatever was about to happen to me. But I'll never know, and maybe that's better. All I know is that when I drove away that night, I felt like I escaped something I wouldn't have survived. And now, every time I drive alone at night and see a car pulled over, I remember that heavy, silent fear in my chest. It reminds me that the world isn't fairy tale scary. It's quiet and real and human. And that's the part that keeps me up some nights, staring at the dark ceiling, listening for sounds that aren't there, thinking about how close I came to disappearing without anyone knowing why. My little brother and I grew up in the absolute middle of nowhere, deep in a national park in Wyoming. Our house was surrounded by nothing but trees, rocky hills, and quiet dirt roads that stretched out for miles. The nearest neighbor was a good 15-minute walk down the road, and the school bus ride every morning took nearly an hour, winding along narrow mountain roads before we reached town. The air was always cold and sharp in the mornings, even in spring, and when we got off the bus in the afternoon, the sun would be dipping low behind the hills, making long shadows across our yard. We were used to being alone in the house for a few hours after school. My parents worked for the park services, and their shifts usually ended around 5. We got home from school at about 2:30. Most days, my brother would throw his backpack on the couch and head straight to the TV to watch cartoons. I would usually go to the kitchen to get an apple or a handful of pretzels before sitting down to do my homework at the dining table. The house was always quiet when we came in. Sometimes I would hear the fridge humming or the old heater clicking as it warmed the living room, but it felt peaceful, safe. This day felt like any other. The bus dropped us at the end of the long gravel driveway. We walked side by side up to the house, our backpacks bumping against us. The gravel crunched under our shoes, and pine needles drifted down from the trees that lined the driveway. My brother was dragging his feet a little, kicking at small rocks, humming some tune under his breath. I remember the smell of the pine sap mixed with the cool mountain air. The wind rustled softly through the trees, and it felt normal. Just another day. I unlocked the front door with the key my mom had given me on a piece of blue string. As soon as we stepped inside, the warmth of the house wrapped around us. It smelled faintly like the old wood stove and the cinnamon candle my mom always burned in the evenings. I shut the door behind us, twisting the lock automatically. My brother dumped his backpack on the entryway rug and bent down to untie his shoes. As he did, I turned toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms. That's when I noticed it. My parents' room was down the hall on the right side. The door was always closed when they weren't home. Always. But today, I could see a crack of yellow light shining out into the hallway from the bottom of their door. I paused, staring at it. At first, my brain didn't register anything unusual. Then my brother made a noise. He dropped his backpack, or maybe he dropped his water bottle. The clatter echoed through the quiet house. A second later, I saw something that still makes my skin crawl to this day. From my angle at the entryway, I could see just the edge of the open door into my parents' room. In that narrow sliver of view, I saw a hand reach out and flick the light switch down. The room went dark instantly. The hand was big and pale, and it moved so fast it was like a blur. I froze, staring down that dark hallway. My chest tightened. My heart felt like it stopped for a moment. I couldn't breathe. I just stood there, my hand still on the doorknob behind me. My brother was picking up whatever he had dropped, humming to himself like nothing was wrong. I turned to him slowly. I told him to be really quiet. My voice came out as a whisper, so quiet it felt like it came from someone else's mouth. I don't even think he understood why at first, but when he saw my face, his smile disappeared. He stopped humming. We had this little drawer in the kitchen where my dad kept random tools, screwdrivers, nails, tape, and an old rusty hammer with black tape wrapped around the handle. I walked as quietly as I could to the kitchen and opened the drawer. The metal of the hammer felt cold and heavy in my hand. My brother grabbed his plastic baseball bat from beside the couch. He held it with both hands, gripping it tight, his small knuckles white. I started walking slowly down the hall. Each step felt like it took a full minute. The floor creaked under my weight. My knees felt weak, like they could give out at any moment. My brother followed right behind me, breathing fast and shallow. I could hear his breaths, quick little gasps in the quiet hallway. The house felt different, like the air was thicker, like something was pressing down on us. My hands were shaking so bad I thought I might drop the hammer. My mouth felt dry. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my breathing quiet. About halfway down the hallway, I stopped. I realized that I was 9 years old. My brother was only 7. Whoever was in that room was an adult. Probably stronger, probably with a weapon. We were just kids holding a hammer and a plastic bat. I thought about what would happen if I pushed open that door, and there was a man standing there, staring back at me. I thought about what he could do to us before we even had the chance to scream. My stomach turned cold and tight. My legs started to shake. I turned around and told my brother to follow me. We moved as quietly as we could back into the living room. I put the hammer down on the table and picked up the cordless phone. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely push the buttons. I called my mom's work number. She worked in the park office about 30 minutes away. The phone rang twice before someone picked up. It was her boss. I told her that someone was in our house. My voice was shaking. I was trying not to cry. I told her that we were scared, that we saw a hand in my parents' room, and that the light had been on. She stayed calm. She told me to take my brother and go next door to the neighbor's house. She said she would call the Rangers. I put the phone down and grabbed my brother's hand. We left the house quietly, slipping out the front door. The air outside felt freezing compared to the warm living room. My brother was crying quietly, wiping his nose with his sleeve. I squeezed his hand and told him to hurry. We walked as fast as we could down the gravel driveway. The stones dug into my shoes with every step. I kept looking over my shoulder at the house, expecting to see someone watching us from the windows. The trees felt darker than usual. The sky was turning orange with the setting sun, and everything looked like it was covered in rust. I felt like my legs weren't working properly, like I was walking through water. When we got to the neighbor's house, I knocked on the door as hard as I could. She answered right away. She was an older woman with short gray hair and glasses. She looked down at us with confusion at first, but when she saw how scared we were, she let us inside without asking questions. She gave us water and sat us down at her kitchen table. My brother held my hand under the table. His fingers were freezing cold. We waited there for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 20 minutes. Then we saw them arrive. First, 2 park ranger trucks pulled up to our driveway. Then another truck, and then a police SUV. They parked at the end of the driveway and started putting on their gear. They had guns drawn, and one of them had a big black shield. I watched through the neighbor's kitchen window as they moved up the driveway slowly, spreading out around the house. My stomach was in knots. I felt sick. My brother buried his face in my side and didn't look. They surrounded the house and then moved in through the front door. They went quiet for a while. I imagined them moving through the rooms, checking the kitchen, the living room, the bathroom, the closets. It felt like forever. The neighbor was talking softly to someone on her phone, probably my mom. I couldn't hear anything except the blood rushing in my ears. Finally, one of the rangers came over to the neighbor's house. He knocked, and she let him in. He told her that they checked the whole house. The screen on my parents' bedroom window was pushed out onto the ground. Whoever it was had probably climbed out when they heard us come home. Then he asked if either of us kids had been using a knife. The neighbor shook her head and looked at me. I shook my head too. I hadn't even been in the kitchen yet, and my brother was too small to reach the knife drawer. The ranger said they found a big butcher knife lying on the kitchen floor, just lying there like it had been dropped. He didn't say anything else, but his face looked serious. He told the neighbor to keep us there until my parents arrived. My brother started crying again, big silent tears rolling down his cheeks. I pulled him into my lap and wrapped my arms around him. He was shaking all over. When my parents finally arrived, they rushed into the neighbor's house. My mom knelt down and hugged us both so tight I couldn't breathe for a second. My dad talked to the ranger outside for a while, and then he came in and hugged us too. We stayed at the neighbor's house until the rangers cleared the house completely and replaced the window screen. That night, we slept in the living room with my parents. They pushed the couch against the front door and slept on the floor with their blankets. My brother and I slept on the couch, huddled under a thick quilt. I remember staring at the ceiling fan in the dark, listening to the wind whistle outside. I could hear my dad breathing slow and heavy as he slept on the carpet. My mom stayed awake most of the night, her head resting against the couch, her eyes half open, watching the door. At the time, it didn't feel as scary as it should have. I think my brain didn't want to process how close we had been to something terrible happening. I didn't think about what could have happened if we had gone into that room, if we had tried to fight whoever was in there, if he had come out while we were watching TV. Back then, I just felt tired and glad to be with my parents. I fell asleep listening to the soft sound of my brother breathing next to me. Years later, when I thought about it again, it started to sink in. The hand hitting the light switch, the window screen lying outside, the butcher knife dropped on the kitchen floor. The idea that someone was walking around our house with a knife while we were at school, and that he was still there when we came home, that he turned off the light when he heard us, that he probably watched us from behind the door as we walked down the hallway. It makes my skin crawl even now. We never found out who it was. The rangers searched the woods around our house, but didn't find anyone. When I think back to that summer, the first thing I remember is the smell of that place. It didn't hit you as soon as you walked in. It was more like it seeped into your clothes and skin, and you only realized it was there after you left, like an old rot clinging to your hair. I can still smell it sometimes when I think about it, like damp paper, rust, dried up mud, and something worse hiding underneath it all. That smell would stick in my nose for days after we went there to help. My best friend growing up was Anna. Her parents liked buying houses that nobody else wanted. They'd fixed up another old place before, turning it from a sagging little box with peeling paint into something bright and welcoming with flower pots on the porch and wind chimes hanging from the roof. I think after that they felt like they could take on anything. So when they found this house out in the country, away from everyone, with acres of dry grass and bare trees around it, they bought it without thinking twice. I remember the first day we pulled up there. The driveway was more dirt than gravel, with weeds pushing up through it. The grass was brown and dead, and I could see old rusted-out cars lined up near the edge of the property, their metal bones showing through like they were rotting away. The house itself looked sunken, the way old people sometimes look when they've shrunk down into themselves. The roof sagged in the middle, the windows were smeared with dirt, and the wood siding was warped and darkened with time. Anna's dad asked me and my older brother to help them clear it out. They said they'd pay us a bit, but I think mostly they wanted extra hands. Anna and I were 13, my brother was 15. We thought it would be easy work. At first it was just clearing out the porch, which was covered in old newspapers, beer cans, broken bottles, torn plastic grocery bags, moldy blankets, and so many cigarette butts it looked like someone had been emptying ashtrays there for years. When we went inside, it felt like stepping into a tomb. The air was still and heavy. Dust motes floated in every beam of light. It wasn't silent, though. The house creaked and shifted on its own, like it was breathing. The front room was full of boxes stacked on top of each other all the way to the ceiling. Some had split open and spilled out old clothes, books swollen with moisture, yellowed newspapers, rusted tools, bits of wiring, broken radios, torn apart vacuum cleaners. It looked like the man who'd lived there had never thrown a single thing away. They said he was a shut-in who mostly hunted and didn't like people. I didn't know if he died in the house or not, and I didn't want to know. There was something about the smell and the stale feeling of the air that made me feel like he was still in there somehow, even though I knew that was just my brain playing tricks on me. We worked room by room. Anna and I found old food containers stuffed with cigarette butts, jars of gray water, stacks of hunting magazines stuck together with mold. There was one room where the floor had rotted so bad you could see straight through into the basement. Anna's dad told us to stay away from there until he could fix it. The whole place felt unstable, like if you took out the wrong box or pile, the ceiling would come down on your head. When we got to the basement, it was worse than anything upstairs. The stairs were narrow and sagging, and you could see where the wood was cracked underfoot. Anna's dad went down first to check it out. When he said it was okay, we went down too. The smell changed down there. It smelled like earth and rot and something sharper, something that stung the back of my throat. The basement was packed just like upstairs. There were piles of old cardboard boxes gone soft and dark with moisture, stacks of newspapers turned to brown pulp, broken plastic bins, rusted metal shelves bent under the weight of tools and paint cans, animal cages stacked on top of each other. There were dead bugs everywhere. Anna's dad said the floor was just dirt, but it didn't look like dirt. It looked like something that had broken down over decades into a thick, dark, clumpy mess that smelled like old blood and mushrooms and sour milk all mixed together. That was when we found the refrigerators. They were old, rounded at the corners, the kind you saw in photos from the 50s. Their cords trailed across the floor like dead snakes. There were 3 of them, lined up against the far wall. My brother opened the first one while Anna and I watched. Inside was full of animals. Not meat, not cuts or steaks or anything, but whole animals. Mummified dogs, cats, ducks, geese, turkeys. Their bodies were shriveled and hard, their fur and feathers pressed flat against skin like paper glued to bone. Some were wrapped in plastic grocery bags, twisted tight around them. Others were wrapped in newspapers so old the paper had fused to their bodies. A few weren't wrapped at all. Their eyes were gone, their teeth showing in small dry snarls. None of the game animals had been butchered. They hadn't been cleaned or prepared. They were just dead bodies stuffed inside. I remember Anna staring into that refrigerator and whispering, "Why would anyone do this?" But I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just kept staring at the shriveled face of a little brown dog curled up on the bottom shelf like it was sleeping, its mouth open just enough to show tiny yellow teeth. We spent hours clearing out the basement. We pulled out piles of newspapers so soaked with rot they came apart in our hands. Underneath it all, the floor looked like dirt, but it wasn't real dirt. It was a mix of things that had broken down. Old food, dead bugs, animal hair, broken down paper mold. Anna's dad started a bucket brigade to get it out. We filled 5-gallon buckets with scoop shovels and passed them up the stairs. Each time I scooped into that dirt, I felt like I was digging through a graveyard. And in a way, I was. Because as we worked our way down, we started finding bones. At first it was just little bones, thin and fragile, probably mice or rats. Then we started finding bigger bones, skulls with sharp little teeth, vertebrae ribs, whole skeletons curled into tight balls. Cat skeletons. Some still had collars on them, plastic buckles half melted into their neck bones. We found at least a dozen cats buried under all that rot. My brother tried to act like it didn't bother him, but I saw the way he kept swallowing hard and looking away. Anna didn't say a word. She just kept working, her face pale and tight, sweat dripping off her nose into the bucket as she scooped up more of that dark, broken-down dirt. We worked on that basement for weeks. Every day after school, every weekend. I started having dreams about it. In my dreams, I'd be down there alone, digging through the dirt while the house creaked around me, feeling something watching me from the corners, something that wasn't there when I looked up, but I could feel it anyway. Finally, Anna's dad fixed the stairs to the second floor so we could go up safely. Anna was excited to show me what was going to be her bedroom. I didn't want to go up there, but I didn't want to be alone downstairs either, so I followed her. The stairs were steep, the railing loose. The second floor smelled even worse than downstairs. The heat from the roof trapped all the smells up there and turned them sour. Her room was big, though, bigger than my room at home. It had a wide picture window that looked out over the brown grass and into the dark tree line. You could see for miles if you looked the other way, nothing but open land and sky. The walls were covered in graffiti. Words I couldn't read, just scrawls in black and red spray paint, looping letters and crude shapes. There were holes punched in the drywall everywhere, like fists had slammed through them over and over again. Anna pulled out a bit of drywall from one of the holes to show me something. Inside the hole was a bundle of dirty underwear stuffed into the gap. Each hole had them. Different sizes, colors, all dirty. Some stained dark brown, others stiff with old yellow crust. The smell coming out of those holes was enough to make me gag. I turned away and looked out the window instead, my eyes burning from the smell and the sting of tears. Anna just laughed a little, like she didn't know what else to do. She said her dad would clean it all out and fix the walls. I didn't say anything. I just kept staring out at the trees. There was no wind that day, and the branches were still, almost like a painting. That night was her first night sleeping in her new room. I didn't stay. I told my mom I wasn't comfortable there, and she didn't make me go back. But the next day, Anna told me what happened. I could see it in her eyes before she even spoke. She looked like she hadn't slept at all. Her eyes were rimmed with red, and her hands shook when she tucked her hair behind her ears. She said she'd been lying in bed, staring up at the cracked ceiling, listening to the house creak and settle. She couldn't sleep because the smell of the drywall kept drifting out from the holes, even though her dad had stuffed them with towels for the night. Then she heard a noise, a fast fluttering thud. Before she could sit up, the picture window exploded inward with a scream of glass and feathers. A pheasant had flown straight through the window and landed on her bed, its wings flapping and claws scraping against her blanket, feathers flying everywhere. She'd screamed until her dad came running in. He snapped its neck right there in her bed, blood spraying onto her sheets, and the feathers stuck to it like paintbrush bristles. After that, he carried it out like it was nothing, like it was just another dead animal to deal with in that cursed house. I never went back after that. Not once. Anna kept sleeping there because she didn't have a choice. Her parents spent months trying to fix it up, but eventually they gave up. They sold it at a loss to someone else who thought they could make something out of it. I don't know what happened to that house after that. I never asked. Sometimes I think about that basement, about the refrigerators full of dead animals, the dirt floor made of rotted life, the cats buried under it all. I think about Anna lying in her bed while a dying bird thrashed beside her, its blood soaking into her blankets. I think about the holes stuffed with underwear and the graffiti on the walls, the smell of rot and old metal and death that clung to everything. I think about how you never really know what you're stepping into when you walk into someone else's life or their house. I had come back home for the weekend. It was the middle of the semester, and I just needed a break from the tiny dorm room and the endless cycle of assignments and late-night ramen. My parents were out of town visiting my aunt in the next city over. They trusted me enough to let me have the house to myself. I liked that feeling, that quiet independence of being home alone in a house I grew up in, especially after weeks of sharing a small space with a roommate who snored like a chainsaw. It was a Saturday afternoon. I'd driven in the night before after my last class, threw my bag in my old room, and collapsed on the bed without even unpacking. I woke up feeling stiff from the long drive and decided to take a long, hot shower. The house was cold that morning, so I turned up the heater and let the bathroom steam up completely. I remember standing under the water for almost half an hour, letting it pound on the back of my neck and shoulders, trying to loosen up the knots I didn't even know I had. It felt peaceful. I didn't have to worry about my roommate pounding on the door, yelling at me to hurry up because he needed to piss. I didn't have to care about anyone but myself in that moment. I remember washing my hair twice, scrubbing the week off my skin with my mom's lavender body wash, feeling warm and clean and sleepy. When I finally turned off the shower, the bathroom was filled with thick fog. I wiped the mirror with my hand, staring at my own reflection. My hair was dripping down my forehead, and water was sliding down my chest. I wrapped a towel around my waist, feeling the cold air of the hallway on my shoulders as I opened the bathroom door slightly to let out some steam. The bathroom was at the end of the hallway. To the right was the guest room, which we mostly kept closed, and past that was my parents' room. My room was down the hall to the left. I turned back to grab my phone from the sink counter, but realized it wasn't there. I must have left it charging in my bedroom. I felt a slight annoyance at myself, thinking about the cold walk down the hallway. The house heater had barely started to kick in. The tiles were freezing under my feet as I stood there dripping water onto them. I grabbed my toothbrush and started brushing my teeth lazily, staring at the condensation dripping down the mirror. My mind was blank, half asleep, and enjoying the silence. Then I heard it, that creak, that very specific creaking noise that only came from one place in the entire house, the guest room door. It wasn't like other doors. For some reason, even though it was newer than the rest, the hinges made this sharp, drawn-out squeal when you opened it wide or closed it. Everyone in the family knew that noise. It was a joke between us growing up that if you tried to sneak out and sleep in the guest room instead of your own bed, you'd get caught just because of that squeak. There was no way to quietly open it fully. As soon as I heard it, my body reacted before my mind did. I jumped, almost slipping on the wet tiles, and slammed the bathroom door shut. My heart was hammering in my chest so hard it hurt. For a second, I didn't breathe. I just stood there, holding the towel tighter around my waist, staring at the door as if it was going to burst open any second. I reached out with shaking fingers and locked it. The small silver lock clicked into place. I swallowed, trying to calm my breathing, but it felt like my lungs were too small for the amount of air I needed. My ears were ringing from the sudden adrenaline spike. I leaned against the bathroom sink, gripping the edges so hard my knuckles went white. I forced myself to breathe slowly, in through the nose, out through the mouth. I could hear the water dripping off my hair onto the tiles, each drop echoing in the small bathroom. For a moment, I thought maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just the house settling. But I knew that sound. It was the guest room door. It was that exact high-pitched creak that ended in a sudden metal pop when the hinge shifted under the door's weight. It couldn't be the house settling. It couldn't be the wind. The window in there was shut. The air vents didn't blow strong enough to push a heavy wooden door open like that. My mind started racing through possibilities. Maybe someone had broken in. Maybe they thought the house was empty. Maybe they were going through the rooms, looking for valuables. Maybe they hadn't realized I was here yet. Maybe they did know, and they were coming for me. My heart was pounding so loud I thought whoever was out there could probably hear it. I stood there frozen for a while. I don't know how long. Maybe a minute, maybe 5. The water on my skin started drying, and goosebumps spread over my arms and shoulders. I felt cold and naked and vulnerable. My towel was barely covering me, and I didn't have my phone to call anyone. My parents wouldn't be back for at least another day. No neighbors close enough to hear if I screamed. I crouched down quietly and looked at the gap under the door. The hallway carpet was thick, with a plush pile that pressed up against the bottom of the bathroom door, making it impossible to see if someone was standing directly in front of it. But I could see the light. The hallway light was on, and I could see a faint shadow cutting across the bright strip under the door. Something was blocking the light. I felt my throat tighten. It was like someone was standing right there, inches away from me, silently waiting. My knees felt weak, and my arms were trembling as I crouched there in silence, listening for any noise. A breath, a footstep, a rustle of clothes. Nothing. Just the sound of my own blood rushing in my ears. I thought about my options. I could stay locked in here and hope whoever it was went away. But what if they didn't? What if they decided to kick the door in? I was sitting here defenseless, wearing nothing but a towel. I didn't even have my razor to use as a weapon. My mind was screaming at me to do something before it was too late. I scanned the small bathroom frantically. Then I saw the towel rack on the wall opposite the sink. It was a sturdy metal rod, about 2 feet long and half an inch thick, held in place by 2 brackets. I stood up quickly, ignoring the dizziness in my head from moving too fast, and grabbed the rod with both hands. I yanked it upwards hard, once, twice, 3 times, until the screws finally ripped out of the drywall, and the whole thing came off in my hands. Dust and small flakes of plaster fell to the floor. The metal felt cold and solid in my grip. I held it like a baseball bat, testing its weight. My hands were shaking so badly that it rattled against the sink when I rested it for a second to catch my breath. I pressed my ear to the door again. Still silent. The shadow hadn't moved. My heart was thudding in my chest so hard I could hear it echoing in my head. Every muscle in my body felt tense, ready to explode. My breathing was shallow, each inhale making my chest burn. I counted down in my head. 3, 2, 1. I unlocked the door as quietly as I could, holding my breath. I tightened my grip on the metal rod. Then, before I could lose my nerve, I threw the door open hard and lunged forward with the towel rod held high, ready to swing at whatever was in front of me. And there it was, my cat, my stupid orange tabby cat, sitting on the hallway carpet directly in front of the bathroom door, staring up at me with his wide green eyes. He let out a loud, questioning meow that echoed through the silent hallway. For a second, I just stood there frozen, towel barely hanging on, metal rod raised above my head like some half-naked caveman about to club his prey. My chest was heaving, my vision blurry with adrenaline tears. My cat meowed again and stood up, arching his back in a lazy stretch. His tail flicked back and forth, brushing against the guest room door behind him. I stared at it, my eyes following the movement, and that's when I realized what had happened. The door wasn't fully closed. It never latched right. You could push it open just by leaning against it lightly. He must have nudged it with his tail or brushed against it as he walked past, and the hinge let out that squeaky creak that sounded exactly like someone opening it from the inside. I felt my knees give out, and I sank down onto the floor, leaning my back against the bathroom doorframe. The metal rod clattered onto the carpet beside me. My heart was still pounding so hard it hurt. I felt lightheaded, like I might throw up or pass out. My cat padded over to me and butted his head against my arm, purring loudly like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just taken 10 years off my life in the span of a minute. I sat there for a long time, my towel starting to slip down my hips, my wet hair dripping onto the carpet. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a hollow, shaky feeling in my chest. I reached out and scratched behind my cat's ears, feeling his warm fur under my trembling fingers. He purred louder, pushing his head into my palm. Eventually, I stood up on unsteady legs and walked back to my room. I shut the guest room door firmly this time and wedged a door stopper under it so it wouldn't move again. I dropped the towel rack on the floor next to my bedroom door, too tired to bother fixing it back in place right then. I closed my door, locked it, and collapsed face first onto my bed, my towel still damp against the sheets. I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, listening to my cat jump up onto the bed beside me and curl up against my side, purring softly. My heart finally started to slow down. The house felt quiet again, peaceful in the way it always had when I was growing up. But I couldn't stop thinking about those few minutes in the bathroom, crouched on the floor, staring at that shadow under the door, feeling like I was about to die. It made me realize just how vulnerable we really are when we're alone, how quickly your mind turns against you in silence, how fear can twist something as harmless as a squeaky door and a curious cat into a life-or-death situation in your head. I stayed awake for hours that night, listening to every creak and pop the house made as it settled into the cold. I didn't shower again until my parents came home the next day. And when I finally did, I left the bathroom door wide open and made sure my cat was asleep on my bed before I even turned the water on. I was around 14 or 15 years old when it happened. I still remember that night as if it happened yesterday. It was late, maybe past midnight, but I wasn't keeping track of the time. I was lying in my bed on my stomach, trying to fall asleep. The room was dark, with only a faint yellow light from the street lamp outside leaking through the thin curtains. My bed felt warm and heavy, like it always did after a tiring day of school, homework, and just existing as a teenager. My room was simple. I had my small wooden desk under the window, stacked with books and some old notes I never bothered to throw away. Beside the desk, there was a plastic chair with my backpack hanging from the backrest. On the left side was my cupboard with clothes folded in a messy way, and a few shirts hanging half-fallen from their hangers. The wall across from my bed had posters from old games and random magazine cutouts. My phone charger lay near my pillow, plugged into the socket right behind my bed. The ticking sound of the clock on my wall was clear in the silence of the room, mixing with the soft humming of the pedestal fan placed near the cupboard, blowing warm air back and forth. I was tired, but sleep wasn't coming easily that night. My mind kept wandering to school, about assignments due, the way my friends laughed at something I said earlier, and whether I should have spoken up in class today. All these thoughts blended and repeated over and over. At some point, my eyelids felt heavy, and my mind drifted into that hazy space between wakefulness and sleep, where dreams start to mix with reality. It's that peaceful floating feeling, where you aren't fully aware, but not completely gone either. That's when I started to feel it. It was a sudden weight pressing down on my back. At first, I thought I was imagining it, like when your leg feels numb, or you get that falling sensation when drifting off. But this felt different. It wasn't just a numb heaviness. It felt like someone was placing their entire hand flat on my back and slowly adding more pressure. The weight spread from my upper back to the middle and lower part, pressing me deeper into my mattress. It didn't hurt, but it felt like a strong, constant push that was impossible to move against. At the same time, I heard a woman's voice whispering right next to my ear. It was so close I could almost feel her breath brushing against my skin. The voice was calm and soft, like a mother trying to soothe her child to sleep. She was saying things, but I couldn't remember the exact words. They were pleasant, almost comforting phrases, and the tone had a rhythm to it, like a song or a gentle prayer being repeated over and over. It was such a soothing sound that it felt like my body was sinking deeper into the bed with every word. I didn't feel afraid at that moment, only strangely relaxed, as if I was being taken care of by someone familiar and warm. My eyelids were closed, but my mind felt awake, listening to her whispers echoing softly inside my head. But then, out of nowhere, a sharp feeling of fear broke through the trance. My heart suddenly kicked hard against my chest. It was like a loud alarm went off inside me, screaming that something was terribly wrong. I didn't know why I felt that way all of a sudden. There was nothing scary in her words or her voice. But I remember thinking, wait a minute, this isn't right. This is so fucked up. Why can't I move? I tried to get up. I tried to turn my head or lift my arms to push myself off the bed. But nothing happened. My body didn't respond at all. I couldn't even twitch a finger. It felt like my entire body had been buried under wet cement. Panic rose up in my chest so quickly that I could feel my breathing go shallow. I kept trying, sending desperate signals to my arms and legs to move, but they remained completely still. I was trapped. Only my eyes were able to move slightly under my closed eyelids. My ears were still filled with her soft whispering, repeating those unknown words that started to feel twisted and wrong. Those 10 or 15 seconds felt like an hour. My heart thudded harder and harder. My mouth was dry. I could feel the warmth of my blanket trapped against my skin, but also a strange coldness around the edges of my body, like a chilly air creeping along my arms and neck. I remember thinking, is this how people die in their sleep? Is this what it feels like to get possessed? Because at that moment, I was completely convinced that something beyond this world was pressing me down, whispering into my ear, and keeping me frozen. My brain felt like it was splitting between the calming effect of her voice and the screaming terror that told me I was about to die. Suddenly, it stopped. My muscles came back alive in a split second. My body shot up like I had been thrown upwards. I gasped for air and twisted around so fast that my neck hurt. The room was completely silent except for my shaky breathing and the ticking of the clock on the wall. The whispering was gone. The pressure was gone. There was no one there. Just darkness, stillness, and the faint street lamp glow leaking through the curtain. I sat on my bed, my hands shaking badly. My chest hurt from how hard my heart was pounding. I could still feel a phantom heaviness on my back, like a memory burnt into my muscles. I looked around the room slowly, at the shadows on the walls, at the floor, at my desk, at my chair with my backpack hanging from it, at the faint outline of the door. Nothing. There was nothing there. Just me alone, with the faint smell of dust and sweat filling my nose. My mouth tasted dry and metallic, like when you wake up from a nightmare. I didn't even try to go back to sleep. I sat there on my bed, knees pulled up to my chest, listening to every sound of the house. The fan hummed back and forth, as the blades cut through the thick summer air. Occasionally, a car passed by outside, its headlights crawling across my ceiling for a brief second before fading away. My eyes kept scanning the corners of my room, waiting for something to move or for the whispering to return. But it didn't. I remember staring at the faint glow of my digital clock for hours, watching the numbers change, waiting for the sky to lighten. Every few minutes I would stretch my fingers or toes just to reassure myself I could move. My body felt heavy and sore, like I had been holding tension for too long. When dawn finally came and the sky outside my window turned pale orange, I felt a small relief inside me, like the daylight would keep whatever that thing was away. For many weeks after that, I couldn't sleep on my stomach. I started sleeping curled up on my side with my blanket pulled up to my chin, facing the wall. I also left a small lamp turned on every night because the darkness felt unsafe after that experience. Every creak of the floorboards, every shifting shadow, every faint sound from outside made my body tense up again. Sometimes, I would imagine hearing her whispering just as I was about to fall asleep. I would snap my eyes open and lie awake for hours, feeling my chest tighten with fear that it was happening again. I didn't tell anyone about it at first because it felt too strange to explain. I didn't want people to think I was making it up or trying to sound dramatic. I kept thinking about what it could have been. I searched online about sleep demons and ghosts pressing you down at night. I read so many posts about people saying it was an evil spirit, a ghost, or something paranormal trying to hurt them. Some stories described the exact same feeling, the weight on their chest or back, the feeling of being frozen, seeing or hearing something that wasn't really there. It wasn't until a year later when I was in high school, sitting in my AP psychology class, that I finally learned what it actually was. We were going through the chapter about sleep cycles and sleep disorders. Our teacher started explaining about REM sleep, how our bodies become completely paralyzed so that we don't physically act out our dreams. Then she mentioned something called sleep paralysis. She said it happens when your mind wakes up, but your body is still in that REM paralysis. You're stuck in between, aware of your surroundings, but unable to move. She also said it often comes with hallucinations because your brain is still partly dreaming, so you might see, hear, or feel things that aren't really there. People often describe seeing dark figures, feeling pressure on their chest, or hearing voices whispering in their ears. It's harmless, she said, but terrifying for the person experiencing it. As I sat there listening to her talk, I felt a chill go through my entire body. It was like a puzzle piece finally fitting into place. That night wasn't paranormal. It wasn't a ghost or a demon or anything supernatural. It was my own brain, waking up at the wrong time, showing me dreams in real life while keeping my body completely frozen. But even after knowing the science behind it, it didn't make it any less terrifying in my memory. To this day, every time I lie on my stomach and start drifting off to sleep, I remember that night. The weight pressing down on my back. The woman's whisper right next to my ear, soothing and calm, words I couldn't understand, but somehow felt comforting. The feeling of being trapped inside my own body, while my heart raced so fast it felt like it would burst. The 10 seconds that felt like dying. And then, the relief of waking up and finding myself alone in my quiet room, just a scared teenager sitting in bed, staring at the dark. It never happened again after that. Maybe it was because I changed the way I slept, or maybe because I was too scared to let myself drift into that half-awake, half-asleep state again. But that single night was enough to leave a mark on my mind forever. Even now, as an adult, when people talk about sleep paralysis and laugh it off, I feel my chest tighten a little. Because it's not just a funny story or a simple dream. When it happens to you, when you feel your body trapped under an invisible weight and your ears filled with whispers, when your heart races and your brain screams that something is wrong, it feels real. It feels like you're about to die, or about to be taken away by something you can't even see. I don't believe in About 3 years ago, I used to work the front desk at a hotel. It wasn't anything too fancy, but it wasn't some broken down place either. The lobby always smelled like fresh coffee. The carpet was cleaned every morning, and the glass doors at the entrance were wiped down before guests woke up. I liked working there because it was quiet most of the time. The guests were mostly business people passing through, or old couples visiting family nearby. It was a steady job that paid my bills and gave me just enough to buy snacks after shifts. The front desk was right by the main entrance. Behind me was a short hallway that led to the 2 offices, one for the manager and one for the assistant manager. The manager's office had 2 windows, both facing out to the parking lot, so she could see who came and went without leaving her desk. The assistant manager's office, though, had no windows. Just 4 walls, a computer desk, filing cabinets, and one door that opened inward. There was no other exit. If the door was blocked, whoever was inside couldn't get out. I remember the assistant manager always kept his desk pushed up against the far wall, opposite the door, with his computer monitor turned slightly toward the left. He kept framed pictures of his wife and kids lined up on the right side, papers stacked on the left, and a plastic cup full of blue and black pens next to his phone. There wasn't much room to move things around in there. It was a small office, just big enough for him to roll his chair from the desk to the filing cabinet behind him. One morning I came in for my usual shift. It was early, just after sunrise, and the sky outside was still that dark gray color that slowly lightens as the sun comes up. I walked in, poured myself a small cup of coffee from the lobby machine, and sat down at the desk. My manager came out of her office not long after I sat down. She looked tired, her hair tied back in a messy bun, her eyes still puffy from sleep. She asked me if anyone came in during the night. Specifically, she wanted to know if the handyman had come in. The handyman was an older guy, maybe in his late 50s. He lived in the next town over and only came in if something broke at night, like a toilet clogging up or a guest getting locked out of their room. He had a master key that opened everything in the hotel, including the offices. I told her no, he didn't come in. I had been there all night. She didn't say anything back, just nodded slowly, looking even more tired than before. I didn't think much of it until later that morning when the assistant manager showed up for his shift. He always came in early to check emails before the rest of the staff arrived. But that morning he couldn't get into his office. I watched him walk back and forth from the office door to the front desk, shaking his head. Finally, he called the manager over, and they both tried opening the door. It wouldn't budge. I got up to see what was going on. The door handle turned just fine, but the door itself was blocked. It didn't move even an inch inward. After a few minutes of pushing and shoving, the manager squeezed her hand through the crack of the door and felt around. She pulled her hand back and said the desk was against the door. That didn't make any sense. The assistant manager's desk was heavy, at least 40 or 50 pounds, maybe more. It was one of those old wooden desks with metal edges, the kind that takes two people to move without scraping the floor tiles. And it wasn't just empty. On top were his computer monitor, keyboard, stacks of paperwork, framed family photos, his phone, and that cup of pens. All of that should have slid or fallen off if the desk moved. But when they finally managed to push the door open, just wide enough to peek inside, everything was still sitting neatly in place. Nothing had fallen over, not even the pens. They had to call the handyman to come in anyway, because they couldn't push the desk back enough to squeeze through. When he arrived, he had to use a metal tool to pry the door frame out slightly, so the door would open wider. Once it opened, we all stood there staring at the desk. It was pressed right up against the door, at an angle like it had been shoved from the side, and then twisted so it wedged itself perfectly between the door and the opposite wall. There were no scuff marks on the tiles leading up to the door. The desk just moved. We all stood there quietly for a few seconds before the assistant manager walked in and checked his computer. It was fine. The pictures were fine. The pens hadn't even rolled off the desk. He sat down like normal and started working, but I could tell he was shaken up. We all were. After the handyman left, the manager turned to me again and asked if I was sure no one came in during the night. I told her again, no, I was the only one there, and I hadn't left the front desk except to use the bathroom. The thing that always bothered me about that day was how calm everyone tried to act afterward. The assistant manager didn't bring it up again, and the manager acted like it never happened. But every time I walked past that office door, I felt uneasy. I kept thinking about how the desk moved. There was only one way in and one way out of that office. No windows to climb through. No vents big enough for anyone to crawl inside. Someone would have had to push the desk from the inside, but there was no one there. The hotel was old, built back in the late 60s. Sometimes old buildings creak or settle at night. But a heavy desk doesn't just slide across the floor and block a door without leaving marks. I tried to forget about it, but then there were other things that happened too, things that didn't make sense. For example, sometimes when I worked the late shift, close to midnight or 1 in the morning, I would hear the alarm chime go off. The alarm was connected to the doors at the far ends of the hotel. Anytime someone opened one of those side exits, the alarm would beep at the front desk, so we could keep track of who was coming in or out. It wasn't a loud alarm, just a soft beep, but it was enough to make me look up from whatever I was doing. Almost every night I heard that alarm go off at least once. I would glance at the security monitors, expecting to see a guest walking out with their luggage for an early flight, but there was never anyone there. The door would open, beep, and close again, but the cameras showed nothing. No shadows, no blurry figures, just an empty hallway with the door swinging open and shut. At first I thought maybe it was the wind, but those doors were heavy with metal frames and thick weather stripping. Even on stormy nights with howling winds, those doors didn't budge unless someone pulled them open. It always happened near the end of my shift, around 3 or 4 in the morning, when the whole hotel felt dead quiet. The lobby lights were dimmed, the coffee machine was off, and the only sound was the hum of the vending machines down the hall. That beep from the alarm would cut through the silence and echo around the front desk area. I always checked the monitors right away, half expecting to see something standing there, but I never did. The hotel was located right next to a small cemetery. You could walk out the side exit and be standing at the rusted gate in less than 10 steps. It wasn't a big cemetery, just a small fenced-in lot with maybe 20 gravestones, most of them so old you couldn't read the names anymore. Some guests didn't even know it was there. Others asked about it at check-in, making nervous jokes about staying next to dead people. At night, when I sat behind the front desk staring at the monitors, I sometimes let my eyes drift toward the side door camera that pointed directly at the cemetery gate. The camera was black and white, with grainy footage that always flickered slightly, like an old movie reel. I never saw anyone walk into the cemetery at night, but sometimes the gate would be open in the morning when it had been closed the night before. I didn't want to think about who opened it. One night, I decided to go check the side door after the alarm beeped for the 3rd time. It was around 2:30 in the morning. The hotel was silent except for the faint buzzing of the exit sign above the door. I grabbed the flashlight we kept under the desk and walked down the hallway. The carpet muffled my footsteps, but my heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. When I reached the door, I pushed it open and stepped outside. The air was cold and still. The metal gate to the cemetery stood closed, but I could see the tops of the gravestones over the fence. The moon was out, bright enough to light up the grass and cast shadows across the headstones. I stood there for a few seconds, listening. There was no wind, no cars passing on the road, no crickets. Nothing. Just silence so deep it made my chest feel tight. I turned around and went back inside. When I checked the security footage later, I watched myself walk out the door and stand there alone, staring at the cemetery. The door closed behind me, and for a brief second before it shut completely, the camera glitched and went dark. When the picture came back, I was gone, but I knew I hadn't moved. After that, I stopped checking the side door at night. I would hear the alarm beep, look at the monitor, see nothing, and just sit there with my coffee growing cold in my hand. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just old wiring, or maybe the door sensors were getting rusty. But deep down, I didn't believe it. I never believed it. I quit that job a few months later. I told my manager I found something with better pay, which was true, but the real reason was I couldn't stand being there alone at night anymore. Every time I sat at that front desk, I felt like I was being watched, like there was something standing just out of view, waiting for me to look away. Even now, years later, I still think about that desk blocking the office door. I think about the alarm beeping in the middle of the night, the silent cemetery just steps away from the exit, the cameras flickering with nothing on them. I think about how heavy that desk was, how no one could have moved it without making noise or leaving marks, how the pens stayed upright in their cup the whole time. I think about all of it, and it still makes my stomach twist. When people ask me about my old job at the hotel, I just say it was quiet and boring. But in the back of my mind, I remember the way the hallways felt at night. I never liked taking the back roads at night, but that day I had no choice. I left work late, around 11 p.m., and I had an hour-long drive home through the countryside. The main highway was blocked because of an accident, so I took a detour through small roads that cut through fields and forests. I was already tired from the long shift at the warehouse, my eyes burning and my shoulders sore from lifting boxes all day. My old Honda Civic hummed steadily along the narrow road, the headlights cutting through the dark, but only showing me what was right in front. Everything else was pitch black. Sometimes I saw faint shapes of trees or bushes on the sides, but mostly it felt like I was driving through a tunnel made of darkness. I rolled down my window a little to feel the cold air, so I wouldn't drift off to sleep. My eyelids felt heavy, and I slapped my cheek lightly a few times to wake myself up. I turned up the radio, but there was only static on most channels out here. Eventually, I found a channel playing old classic rock, so I let it play softly. Even then, I kept yawning, my vision going blurry now and then, until a gust of cold wind hit my face and woke me up again. I remember thinking that I just had to make it home and collapse on my bed. That thought kept me going. About 20 minutes into the drive, I noticed that the road ahead curved sharply to the right and disappeared behind thick trees. I slowed down, gripping the steering wheel tighter. As I turned, my headlights lit up something on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was a fallen tree branch, but as I drove closer, I realized it was a parked car with its hazard lights blinking slowly. I slowed to a crawl. The car was an old brown SUV, covered in dust and dirt. Its windows were dark. It was pulled halfway onto the grass on the side, but the hazard lights kept blinking, lighting up the wet road in orange flashes. My first instinct was to keep driving. It was late, I was alone, and I had heard stories of people getting robbed like this, fake breakdowns on empty roads. But something made me slow down. Maybe it was the way the back of the SUV was slightly tilted downwards, like the rear tire was flat, or it had sunk into the soft ground. I stopped my car about 10 feet behind it, engine running, and looked around. There was nothing but trees and darkness. No houses, no streetlights, just the ticking sound of my car's engine and the blinking hazards ahead. I thought about driving past, but guilt tugged at me. What if someone actually needed help? I put the car in park and sat there for a moment, thinking. Finally, I took out my phone and turned on the flashlight. I didn't want to turn off the engine, so I left the door open slightly and stepped out into the cold. The night air bit into my skin instantly, and I shivered, pulling my hoodie tighter around me. My shoes crunched on the wet gravel as I walked towards the SUV. When I got closer, I noticed the driver's door was slightly open, not enough to see inside clearly, but open just an inch or two. My stomach tightened. Something felt wrong. I walked slowly to the front and shone my phone light inside. The front seats were empty. The dashboard lights were off except for the hazard light indicator. I stepped around to the passenger side and tried to look into the back seats through the tinted windows, but I couldn't see anything. I called out softly, but there was no reply. That's when I noticed the muddy footprints on the gravel beside the car. They led from the driver's side into the trees. The mud was fresh and dark, and the footprints were deep, like someone was walking fast or stumbling. My heart started beating faster. I turned around to check my own car. It sat there quietly with its headlights pointing ahead, the engine humming. Part of me wanted to run back to it and leave, but another part felt like I couldn't just leave whoever was out there. I followed the footprints slowly, shining my light on the ground. They led through the grass into the tree line. As soon as I stepped under the trees, the temperature dropped. The smell of wet leaves and earth filled my nose. The ground was uneven, and my shoes slipped a few times. I kept looking ahead, shining my light around. The forest was silent except for the faint rustling of leaves above me. I moved forward, heart thumping so hard it made my chest feel tight. After a few minutes, I saw something ahead. My light caught on a pale shape between two trees. I stopped. It looked like a person sitting on the ground, their back against a tree trunk, knees drawn up to their chest. I took a few careful steps forward until my light fully lit them up. It was a man, probably in his 40s, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans soaked in mud. His face was pale and sweaty, and he was staring straight ahead at nothing. His breathing was ragged and fast. I stood there for a moment, not knowing what to do. My mind was racing. Was he injured? Had he been attacked? I looked around quickly, scanning the trees, but there was no one else. I stepped closer and saw his hands were shaking badly. One hand was clutched around something pressed against his side. I moved my light down and realized it was blood. Dark, wet blood covered his shirt around his ribs and dripped onto the roots under him. My throat went dry. The smell of iron filled the cold air. He didn't move or look at me. He just kept staring ahead, breathing in short gasps. I could see his eyes blinking rapidly, like he was trying to stay conscious. I didn't know what to do. I looked at my phone, no signal. I tried dialing emergency services anyway, but the call wouldn't go through. I felt a wave of panic rise in my chest, but I forced myself to calm down. I stepped closer and crouched near him. His breathing sounded wet and rattly, like each breath was a struggle. I thought about picking him up and carrying him to my car, but he was bigger than me and I wasn't strong enough to lift him properly, especially with his injuries. I stood up and looked around, trying to see if there was any sign of who did this to him. The trees stood silent and dark all around, their branches swaying slightly in the cold breeze. I felt so exposed and alone. My stomach turned with fear, and I kept thinking someone was watching me from the shadows. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze. Behind me, back towards the road, I heard the faint crunch of gravel. Footsteps, slow and steady. I turned my light around, but saw nothing. The sound stopped. The forest fell silent again. My breathing got faster. I shone my light in every direction, my hand shaking. I couldn't see anyone, but I felt eyes on me. Every hair on my arm stood up. I turned back to the man against the tree. His eyes were closed now, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. My mind was screaming at me to run, but I couldn't leave him there. I tried to listen for the footsteps again, but all I could hear was my own heart beating loud in my ears. Then I heard the sound again, this time from my left, deeper in the trees. Another crunch, another slow step. My chest felt tight with fear. I backed away from the injured man, shining my light wildly around me. The trees shifted in the wind, shadows moving like figures in the dark. I took another step back, nearly tripping over a root. That's when I saw movement. Between the trees, about 30 feet away, something moved quickly behind a trunk. I couldn't see clearly, just a dark shape, but it was tall, much taller than me. I felt a cold wave wash through my body. I turned and ran back towards the road, stumbling over rocks and roots. Branches whipped my face and arms, but I didn't stop. I could hear movement behind me now, fast footsteps keeping pace with me, weaving between the trees. My breath came out in ragged gasps, my chest burning with each step. When I broke out of the tree line and reached the road, I didn't look back. I sprinted straight to my car, threw myself inside, and slammed the door shut. I locked the doors and sat there, shaking all over, trying to catch my breath. The forest stood silent behind me. My headlights lit up the empty road ahead. I kept expecting to see someone run out of the trees, but nothing came. After a few minutes, my hands stopped shaking enough for me to shift into drive. I looked at the SUV one last time. The hazard lights kept blinking steadily, lighting up the road in orange flashes. I drove past it, not stopping, not even slowing down. My eyes flicked to the rearview mirror every few seconds, expecting headlights or a figure running after me, but the road stayed empty. The further I drove, the warmer the car felt, and the adrenaline slowly drained out of my body, leaving me cold and shaky. I kept driving until I reached the small town on the edge of the county. I stopped at the first gas station I saw, parked under the bright fluorescent lights, and sat there for a long time with my head against the steering wheel. Eventually, I went inside and asked the cashier to call emergency services. He looked at me strangely because I was pale and trembling all over, but he made the call. I told the dispatcher everything: the SUV, the injured man, the footsteps in the woods, and the shadow I saw. They said they would send an ambulance and police to check the scene. I sat there in the gas station for nearly an hour, sipping bad coffee from a paper cup, staring blankly at the tiled floor. My body felt like it wasn't mine, like I was floating above myself. Later that night, I got a call back. They found the SUV. They found the man. He was dead by the time they reached him. Stab wound to the side. No sign of whoever did it. They said there were footprints leading away from the scene, deeper into the woods, but they lost the trail after a while. No one was found. No suspect. No motive. Nothing. I drove home after that, finally reaching my small apartment as the sun was rising. I sat on my bed in the dim light, still in my work clothes, staring at the wall for hours. I kept thinking about the man sitting against the tree, alone and bleeding in the dark, and about the footsteps I heard. I never took that road again. Even today, years later, I woke up at 4:30 in the morning because of the birds outside. Their calls came through the open window next to my bed, and at first, I just lay there listening. It was still dark in my room. The air was cool, almost cold, and I could hear the faint rustle of leaves outside as the breeze picked up every few seconds. I didn't want to get up yet. My eyes were heavy, and I felt like I could drift back to sleep, but my bladder started aching, and I knew I had to get out of bed. I swung my legs out and put my feet on the cold floor. For a moment, I just sat there, rubbing my face with my hands. I didn't bother turning on the light, because I knew the way to the bathroom by memory. The house was silent, except for the ticking clock in the living room. I walked down the hallway slowly, feeling the wooden floor creak under my weight. I reached the bathroom, turned on the dim light above the sink, and squinted at the sudden brightness. After finishing, I washed my hands and splashed some water on my face to wake up properly. The mirror in front of me was fogged from the cold air, meeting the warmth of the small heater in the corner. When I went back to my room, I lay down again but couldn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling in the darkness, listening to the birds getting louder outside. After about half an hour, I decided I might as well get up and start my day. I changed into my work clothes, old jeans, a dark gray hoodie, and my steel-toe boots. I worked for a landscaping company that did lawn care, tree removal, small excavations, and cleanups. The days were long and tiring, but I liked being outside and staying busy. I went into the kitchen and made some coffee. The smell filled the house, warm and comforting. I took a mug and went out the back door, stepping onto the small porch to watch the sun rise behind the hills. The sky was turning pale orange, and the grass was covered in a layer of dew. The morning felt calm. For a few minutes, I just stood there, sipping coffee, feeling the steam hit my face, and breathing in the smell of damp earth mixed with fresh air. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from my boss telling me to go directly to the big property on Deer Creek Road. We had to clear some overgrown brush along a half-mile fence line for a rancher who wanted to put new fencing up. I grabbed my lunchbox, gloves, safety glasses, and left the house, locking the door behind me. The drive was about 40 minutes. The roads were empty because it was still so early. I watched the sun coming up behind me in the rearview mirror. It made the sky bright gold, and I could see mist floating over the fields as I drove past them. When I reached Deer Creek Road, I turned onto the gravel driveway that led to the property. The driveway was long and curved through thick trees before opening up into a wide clearing with old wooden fencing falling apart in some places. Our company trucks were already parked there. I pulled in beside them, grabbed my gloves and glasses, and walked over to the crew. Everyone looked half awake, sipping coffee and stretching before we started. Our boss handed out assignments for each section of the fence. I was given a stretch that went deep along the west side where the woods grew thick and the ground dipped down into small gullies filled with blackberry brambles. I grabbed a machete and a pair of loppers from the tool trailer. The sun was fully up now, but down in the trees it still felt dark and cold. I made my way along the fence, hacking down tall weeds, slicing blackberry vines that snagged at my clothes, and cutting low branches. My arms started burning from swinging the machete over and over. Every few minutes, I stopped to catch my breath and look around. I liked working alone in the early mornings like this. All I heard was the sound of birds, the distant hum of trucks, and the soft snap of branches under my boots. I kept working until around 10 a.m. when the sun finally rose high enough to light up the forest floor. I set my tools down and took off my gloves to eat a snack. I pulled out a granola bar and leaned against a tree, feeling the rough bark against my back as I chewed. The forest felt peaceful. Light filtered down through the branches above me, and I could see dust motes floating in the beams of sunlight. When I finished eating, I decided to relieve myself before getting back to work. I stepped off the fence line into the thicker trees for privacy. As I walked deeper, the ground dipped down and the smell of damp earth got stronger. I found a spot between two big cedar trees, finished quickly, and zipped up my jeans. Just as I turned around to go back, I noticed something odd about the ground ahead. There was a patch of dirt that looked disturbed. The earth was darker there, and small clumps were pushed up like it had been dug recently. I felt a chill run up my back. It was probably just an animal digging for roots or bugs, but I felt uneasy anyway. I walked over to it and looked down. The dirt wasn't dug like a small animal would do. It looked scraped up in lines, like fingers had clawed at it. The marks were shallow but long, and the ground around it was packed down in a strange way. I crouched down and ran my hand over the dirt. It felt dry on top but damp underneath, like it had been freshly disturbed and then covered again. I stood up quickly, brushing the dirt off my palm. My stomach felt tight, and I didn't know why. I turned and started walking back to the fence line faster than before. I picked up my machete and loppers and forced myself to keep working, pushing the thoughts away. But all morning, I kept thinking about those scrape marks in the dirt. I kept seeing them in my mind, the way the ground was ripped up in uneven lines. By lunchtime, I couldn't focus on my work anymore. The other guys called out to me to come eat, but I said I wasn't hungry. I walked back into the woods, back to that spot. The ground looked the same, but in the daylight I noticed something else. A few feet away, the leaves were matted down in a wide patch, like something heavy had been lying there. I scanned the area, feeling my heartbeat in my chest. I didn't want to be there, but I couldn't make myself leave either. I walked around slowly, looking at the ground, looking at the trees, feeling the hairs stand up on the back of my neck. The woods were silent now except for the wind moving through the high branches. I kept expecting to hear a bird or a squirrel, but there was nothing. After a few minutes, I forced myself to go back to work. I spent the rest of the day clearing brush and keeping my eyes down, not thinking about anything except the next vine or branch in front of me. When we finished for the day, I walked back to my truck quickly. I didn't look back at the woods. That evening, after I got home and showered, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring at the wall. My body felt tired, but my mind wouldn't calm down. I kept thinking about the scrape marks, about the matted down leaves, about the silence in the woods. I tried to tell myself it was just an animal, maybe a deer kicking at the dirt or lying down there. But something about it felt wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling again, listening to the sounds of the house settling, the distant barking of a dog down the road, and the occasional car driving past. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that patch of disturbed dirt. Around midnight, I got up and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. I stood by the sink, staring out into the darkness of my backyard. The moon was bright, lighting up the grass in a pale blue glow. I felt a tightness in my chest I couldn't explain. The next morning, I went back to the same property. Our boss told us to finish the last stretch of the fence line. As I walked past the spot in the woods again, I slowed down. The dirt was even more disturbed now. It looked like something had been digging there overnight. The scrape marks were deeper, and the pile of loose earth was bigger. My mouth went dry, and I felt my hands shaking slightly. I didn't want to be there anymore. I forced myself to work quickly. My chest felt heavy all morning. Every time I looked back at the woods, I expected to see something watching me. But there was nothing, just empty trees and silent air. At noon, I heard my boss calling us back to the trucks. I didn't hesitate. I dropped my tools in the trailer, got into my truck, and left as soon as I could. On my way home, I kept thinking about the dirt. I kept imagining what could be buried there. A dead animal, a bag of trash, or something worse. I thought about telling someone, my boss, the ranch owner, even the sheriff's department, but I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe I was afraid of what they would find. Maybe I was afraid of being the one who found it. When I got home, I sat in my truck for a long time before going inside. The sun was still high in the sky, but I felt like the day was over already. I felt drained, like every bit of energy had been pulled out of me. I finally went in, took off my boots, and lay down on the couch, staring at the ceiling. My mind kept replaying the same images over and over. The scrape marks, the matted down leaves, the way the woods felt silent and heavy. That evening, I sat outside on my porch again, drinking coffee as the sun set behind the hills. The sky turned pink and purple, and the birds started calling out their evening songs. The air smelled like warm grass and dry earth. Everything looked peaceful and calm, but my chest still felt tight. I knew I wasn't going back to that property again. I didn't want to see that spot in the woods anymore. I didn't want to know what was buried there. That night, I slept on the couch with the living room light on. I woke up every hour, listening to the silence of the house around me, waiting for the sun to come up so I could feel normal again. In the morning, I called my boss and told him I couldn't work that day. I didn't give him a reason. I spent the whole day sitting in my kitchen, drinking coffee, staring out the window at my quiet yard. As days passed, the feeling didn't go away. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the marks in the dirt. I saw the matted leaves. I felt the cold silence of those woods pressing down on me. Part of me wanted to go back. I woke up early that morning because the sun was shining straight through the window onto my face. I didn't want to wake up yet, but the heat was already building in the room. I lay there for a while, just staring at the ceiling fan slowly turning above me, listening to the sound of birds outside and the occasional truck driving by on the road in the distance. My back felt stiff from sleeping weirdly, so I rolled out of bed and stood up, feeling my feet press against the cold floor. I went to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, brushed my teeth, and tried to wake myself up fully. I didn't have anything planned that day. It was Sunday, and everyone else was out of town. My parents had gone to visit my uncle for the weekend, and my brother was staying over at his friend's house. I liked being alone sometimes because it felt peaceful. I made myself a cup of tea and 2 fried eggs with salt and black pepper, sitting on the kitchen counter as I ate, staring out the window at our backyard. The grass was getting long, and I thought about mowing it later if I felt like it. After breakfast, I put on my old jeans, a dark t-shirt, and my running shoes. I grabbed my headphones and decided to go for a walk to clear my head. The sun was bright, and the sky was completely blue, not a single cloud in sight. I walked down the street, past the neighbor's house, past the empty plots where new houses were being built, and turned left onto the trail that ran behind the neighborhood. This trail wasn't paved. It was just a dirt path with grass and bushes on both sides, leading into a small wooded area before opening up into a wider field where kids sometimes played cricket or football. I liked walking there because it felt separate from the rest of the busy streets. I walked for a while, listening to music, feeling the sweat building on my back from the heat, wiping my forehead every now and then. The birds were louder in the woods, and insects buzzed around my face whenever I stopped walking. When I reached the field, I paused and looked around. No one was there. The grass was yellow and dry, and the breeze felt warm against my skin. I decided to sit under a tree near the edge of the field to rest for a while. I sat down, leaning my back against the rough bark, feeling small pieces of it digging into my shirt. I closed my eyes and listened to the wind moving through the grass. I don't know how long I sat there. I think I even dozed off for a few minutes because I woke up feeling confused about where I was. When I opened my eyes again, I noticed something across the field, near the bushes at the far end. At first, I thought it was just a pile of old clothes or trash that someone had dumped there, but it wasn't. It was a man sitting on the ground with his knees pulled up to his chest, wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. His head was down, and he wasn't moving. I didn't know how long he had been there. I rubbed my eyes to make sure I wasn't seeing things wrong, but he was still there. I felt uneasy, but I told myself maybe he was just resting too, or maybe he was drunk or high, sleeping it off. I tried not to think about it. I got up, brushed the dirt off my jeans, and walked back onto the trail to head home. But as I was walking away, I felt something. You know that feeling you get when someone is watching you? It felt like cold water running down my back. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking, telling myself I was being stupid, that he probably hadn't even seen me. My feet moved faster without me realizing it, and my breath came out in short puffs as I walked. I could feel my heart beating harder than before. About 5 minutes later, I finally looked back over my shoulder, but I couldn't see the field anymore because of the trees. I kept walking until I reached the road again. I crossed over and walked straight home, trying to shake off the feeling. When I got home, I locked the door behind me and went straight to the kitchen to drink some water. My hands were shaking a little as I poured the water into a glass. I drank the whole thing in one go, trying to calm down. I spent the rest of the day inside, cleaning up the living room, doing some laundry, washing the dishes left in the sink. I tried to distract myself by watching videos on my phone, but every now and then my mind went back to that man sitting in the field. Something about it didn't feel right. Evening came, and I made myself some rice with chicken curry leftover from 2 nights before. I ate quickly, feeling restless. It was already getting dark when I realized I hadn't brought the trash bins back in from the roadside. I sighed and put my slippers on, walking out the front door into the muggy evening air. The sky was turning purple and orange, and mosquitoes buzzed around my ears as I walked down to the curb. I grabbed the 2 bins, one in each hand, and started dragging them up the driveway. As I did, I looked across the street out of habit. There, standing on the sidewalk under the streetlight, was the same man from the field. He was wearing the same dark hoodie, hood pulled up over his head. His jeans were dirty, and his shoes looked old and torn. He was standing completely still, facing my house. Even though it was getting dark, I could see his face was turned towards me, but I couldn't see any clear details because of the shadows. My throat felt dry, and I could feel my pulse in my ears. I didn't move for a moment. I just stood there holding the trash bins, staring back at him. I couldn't tell if he was looking directly at me or just at the house in general, but either way, it made my skin crawl. I pulled the bins up the driveway as fast as I could and left them next to the garage. I turned around to see if he was still there, but the street was empty. I looked up and down the road, but there was no sign of him. I went back inside, locked the door, and turned on every light in the house. My hands were trembling as I checked every window to make sure it was closed and locked. I pulled all the curtains shut, trying to block out the outside world. I sat on the couch, knees pulled up to my chest, staring at the front door, listening to every small sound. I could hear the fridge humming, the clock ticking on the wall, and my own shallow breathing. I don't know how long I sat there. The sky turned black outside, and the streetlights cast a yellow glow through the small gaps in the curtains. At some point, I got up and went to my room, locking the door behind me. I sat on my bed with my back against the wall, staring at the door, trying to keep my mind blank. My phone buzzed with messages from friends, but I ignored them. My whole body felt tense, like I was waiting for something to happen. Eventually, I felt so tired I couldn't keep my eyes open anymore. I lay down on my side, still facing the door, and fell asleep with all my clothes on. I woke up in the middle of the night because I heard a noise. It sounded like something brushing against the side of the house. My heart started racing again, and I held my breath, listening. There it was again, a scraping sound, like something dragging across the wall. I got out of bed slowly, my legs feeling weak, and walked to the window. I pulled the curtain back just a little and looked outside. At first, I didn't see anything. The yard was dark except for the weak light from the streetlight. Then I saw a movement near the corner of the house. It was him again. He was standing there, right up against the wall, his face turned towards the window, but his eyes were closed. He was breathing hard, his shoulders rising and falling quickly. His hands were pressed flat against the wall, fingers spread out wide. I let go of the curtain and stepped back, feeling my knees shake. I grabbed my phone and called the police. My voice was shaking so badly, I could barely get the words out. They said they would send a car immediately. I stayed in my room, holding a baseball bat I kept under my bed, listening for any other sounds. My whole body felt like it was made of ice, my teeth chattering even though the room was warm. After what felt like forever, I saw blue and red lights flashing outside through the cracks in the curtain. I heard a car door slam and voices shouting. I didn't dare look out the window, but I heard them telling him to get down. I heard another voice, deep and angry, shouting back at them, but I couldn't understand the words. Then there was silence. I heard footsteps coming up to the front door and a knock. I went out of my room, unlocked the door, and opened it slowly. A police officer stood there with his flashlight in hand. He asked me if I was okay, and I nodded, though I didn't feel okay at all. He told me they had arrested the man. He was carrying a small crowbar in his pocket, and when they searched his backpack, they found zip ties, duct tape, and a large kitchen knife. The officer told me I was lucky I had called when I did. He asked if I knew the man, and I shook my head. I had never seen him before that day in the field. They took him away, and another officer stayed with me for a while, taking my statement and telling me what to do if I ever felt unsafe again. After they left, I sat on the couch in the living room, staring at the spot on the wall where the man had been standing outside. My body felt heavy, and I couldn't stop shaking. I stayed awake until the sun came up, too afraid to sleep, listening to every creak and groan of the house. That morning, when the sun was finally up, I went outside and looked at the side of the house where he had been. There were dirty handprints smeared on the wall, and deep scratch marks where he had dragged the crowbar along the siding. I stood there staring at them for a long time, feeling the cool morning breeze on my face. I thought about what would have happened if I hadn't called the police, if I had fallen asleep without noticing he was there. My stomach twisted at the thought. I spent the rest of that day cleaning the marks off the wall, washing every window, scrubbing the kitchen counters, wiping down every doorknob in the house. I felt like if I just cleaned everything enough, maybe I could wash away the fear too. But I couldn't. Even now, every time I walk past that spot on the wall, I feel my chest tighten and my hands go cold. I keep all the doors locked at all times, and I check the windows 3 or 4 times before I go to bed. I still go for walks, but I never take the trail behind the neighborhood anymore. I stick to the roads where there are cars and houses and people. I woke up earlier than usual that morning. The sun was just coming up, and the room felt cold, even though it was midsummer. I lay in bed for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, feeling that tightness in my chest that I always get before a long day. I knew I had a lot to do. My plan was to go out to the old storage shed behind the house to start cleaning it out. It had been years since anyone went in there properly. My dad used to keep all his tools and old boxes in there, but after he passed away, no one bothered to clear it. Mom didn't like to go back there. She said it made her feel sick thinking about his things rotting away, but I thought it was time to do it. The shed roof had started to sink in places, and water was leaking through the old tarpaulin sheets we had put up years ago. I didn't want it to collapse completely. I got out of bed, feeling the cold floor under my feet. My back cracked as I stretched. I grabbed my phone to check the time. It was 6:09 a.m. I went to the bathroom, washed my face, brushed my teeth, and stared at myself in the mirror for a while. I looked tired. My eyes were puffy. My hair was all over the place. I didn't bother to fix it properly. I just tied it back roughly and went to the kitchen to boil some water for tea. Mom was still asleep. I didn't want to wake her up. She had been feeling sick lately and wasn't sleeping well at night. I stood by the window while the water boiled and looked out into the backyard. The grass was long. I hadn't cut it in a month. Weeds had started growing between the bricks of the back patio. The shed was at the end of the yard, hidden mostly by the tall grass and the 2 big mulberry trees that grew on either side of it. The wood of the shed was dark and damp, almost black in some places. The little window on the side was covered in spider webs and dust. I took a sip of tea, feeling the warmth spread down into my chest. It was a silent morning. Even the birds hadn't started properly yet. After I finished my tea, I put on my work boots. They were muddy from last week when I had helped my uncle dig out his old well pump. I didn't bother cleaning them. I grabbed a pair of gloves, a dust mask, and a small flashlight, just in case. I walked out the back door, feeling the cold morning air hit my skin. My arms got goosebumps. I started walking down the small brick path towards the shed. The grass brushed against my legs. My boots sunk slightly into the damp earth in some places. I could hear my own breathing. Everything felt so quiet. I remember thinking how peaceful it felt, but at the same time, something felt heavy in my stomach, like I was going somewhere I shouldn't. When I reached the shed, I stood there for a moment looking at the door. It was an old wooden door with rusted hinges. The lock was broken. It was hanging loosely. I grabbed the handle and pulled it open slowly. It creaked loudly, echoing into the shed. A gust of musty, moldy air came out. It smelled like wet wood and old cardboard. I switched on my flashlight and stepped inside. The wooden floor felt weak under my boots. I walked carefully, shining the light around. There were boxes stacked up on top of each other. Old jars of screws and nails were lined up on a shelf. A broken ladder was leaning against the back wall. Cobwebs covered everything. The whole place felt damp. The air felt thick, and I started sweating immediately even though it was cold outside. I started with the boxes near the door. I opened one. It was full of old newspapers, all damp and stuck together. I left them there for now. I didn't have a trash bag with me yet. I opened another box. It had old photo albums, some half-eaten by rats. The photos were stuck together, the ink melted into each other. I flipped through a few, seeing pictures of my dad when he was young, mom in her early 20s, old relatives I didn't know. Their eyes in the pictures looked dark and blurry because of the damage. I put the album aside to take back to the house later. As I moved deeper into the shed, I noticed rat droppings all over the floor. Some chewed-up insulation lay near the back where there used to be a small space between the wall and the shelves. I started to hear faint scratching sounds coming from that area. I thought it was probably a rat or squirrel trapped somewhere. I ignored it for now and kept cleaning. I lifted another box. It was heavier than I expected. I opened it, and it was full of old tools. Hammers, wrenches, pliers. All rusted. Some had handles broken off. I started taking them out and putting them on a nearby table to sort out later. The scratching sound continued. It got a little louder. It wasn't constant. It would scratch for a few seconds, then stop. Then it would start again. I felt uneasy. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just a rat trying to dig its way out. But then, as I was putting a wrench down, the scratching turned into thumping. Not loud thumping, just small, rhythmic thumps, like something lightly banging against wood. I turned around, shining my flashlight towards the sound. It was coming from the back corner behind the shelf. I walked towards it slowly, my boots crunching over bits of broken glass on the floor. I felt my chest getting tight again. I held my breath without realizing it. I crouched down and tried to see behind the shelf. The smell was stronger here. It smelled like rotting meat and wet soil mixed together. I gagged slightly, covering my nose with my sleeve. The thumping stopped. I waited for a moment, listening. Everything was silent again, except for my breathing. I stayed there for about 30 seconds, then stood up straight again, feeling a bit stupid for getting scared. I walked back to the table and kept sorting the tools. As I picked up an old rusted saw, the thumping started again. This time it was louder. It was definitely not a rat. It sounded too heavy and deliberate. I turned around quickly and walked back to the shelf. I grabbed the edge of it and tried to move it. It was heavy, filled with jars and metal boxes. I tried to slide it over slightly to look behind. The wood screeched against the floor. I managed to move it about 4 inches, enough to shine my flashlight through. What I saw made my stomach turn. Behind the shelf was a small hole in the wall, about the size of a football. The wood around it was rotten and chewed away. Inside, I saw a pile of black plastic bags, all tied up. One of them was moving slightly, like something was pushing against it from the inside. I felt frozen for a moment. I couldn't look away. The bag moved again, a small thump against the wood. My mouth went dry. I couldn't hear anything except my heartbeat. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was a trapped animal. But then I realized no animal would be tied up in a plastic bag like that. I felt dizzy for a moment. I forced myself to reach in and grab the edge of the bag. It was wet and slippery. I pulled it out slowly. The bottom of the bag had torn open slightly, and a dark brown liquid dripped onto the floor. The smell hit me like a hammer. It was the smell of death. I gagged again, almost throwing up. I dropped the bag on the floor and stepped back, covering my mouth and nose with my sleeve. My eyes watered from the smell. The bag twitched again. I felt sick. I forced myself to look closer, shining my flashlight on the torn part. What I saw didn't make sense to me at first. It was dark brown, almost black, and covered in thick, clotted liquid. Then I saw strands of hair matted together in the mess. My vision blurred for a second. I felt my knees weaken. I stood up quickly, backing away until I hit the table. My breathing was fast and shallow. My chest hurt. I didn't want to look anymore. I ran out of the shed into the backyard, gulping down fresh air, trying not to throw up. I bent over, hands on my knees, feeling like I was going to pass out. My head was spinning. I stood there for a few minutes, feeling the morning sun on my back, trying to calm down. I didn't want to go back in there, but I knew I couldn't leave it like that. I went back into the house, grabbed my phone, and walked back outside. I stood at the door of the shed, looking in, feeling my legs shaking. I didn't know what to do. I knew I should call someone. The police maybe, but my mind was foggy. I didn't want to believe what I saw. I forced myself to go back inside. The smell was worse now. Flies had started buzzing around the bag. I crouched down again, trying not to breathe through my nose, and shined the flashlight on the open part of the bag. This time I saw what it was clearly. It was the head of a dog. Its eyes were missing, and its tongue was swollen and sticking out slightly. The fur was black and brown, matted with blood and rot. Its body was curled up inside the bag. I felt hot tears running down my face. I felt sick to my stomach. I pulled away, sitting down on the floor with my back against the wall, staring at the bag. I couldn't understand why it was there. Who would do this? My dad had died 5 years ago. He wasn't the type of person to hurt animals. We never had a dog like that. I tried to remember if any of the neighbors had lost a dog back then, but nothing came to mind. The shed felt smaller and darker now. I felt trapped in there. I stood up, wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, and walked out again, leaving the door wide open. I walked back to the house, sat down on the back steps, and stared at the grass. My hands were shaking. My chest felt tight and hollow at the same time. I didn't want to tell Mom. She wouldn't be able to handle it. She was already sick and fragile these days. I thought about calling the police, but then I felt stupid. What would I say? That I found a dead dog in a bag in my own shed after 5 years? They would think I was crazy. I sat there for about 20 minutes, listening to the birds starting to sing, feeling the sun getting warmer on my skin. My mind felt numb. After a while, I stood up again and walked back into the shed. The smell hit me even harder this time, but I forced myself to ignore it. I grabbed the edges of the bag and dragged it out of the shed, across the grass. I woke up before the sun came up. My alarm buzzed quietly under my pillow at 4:30 in the morning, and I got up right away because I knew if I didn't, I'd fall back asleep. The air in my small room felt cold against my skin, and I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, just breathing, feeling the hard floor under my feet. I could hear the wind outside brushing against the window screen, like dry fingers scratching against metal. I didn't want to get up so early, but I had planned this hike for weeks. The trail I picked was on the far edge of the state park, about 2 hours away by car. It was known to be quiet, with almost no people around. That was what I wanted. I liked the idea of walking far away from everything and everyone, just feeling alone with the trees and the dirt under my boots. I got dressed in dark sweatpants and a faded gray hoodie. I pulled the hood up, feeling comfort in its loose fit around my face. I packed my backpack the night before with 2 water bottles, some granola bars, my folding knife, my phone with a power bank, and a small first aid kit. I double-checked everything again, zipped up the bag, and put on my old hiking shoes that still had dry mud caked in the cracks from my last trail. The smell of the shoes was earthy, almost like the forest itself. I felt a small rush of excitement and nervousness in my stomach. I always felt it before long hikes. It was a strange mix of fear and happiness, knowing I would be so far out, away from roads and buildings, with no easy way back if anything went wrong. I walked out into the dark living room and grabbed my car keys from the table. I didn't turn on any lights because I didn't want to wake up my roommate. I locked the front door behind me and walked down the small concrete steps to the driveway. The air outside was damp and cold. I could see my breath fogging up in front of me, and the street was empty. My car sat under the yellow glow of the street lamp. I unlocked it and threw my backpack onto the passenger seat, then sat down and started the engine. The quiet hum filled the inside, and I turned on the heater to warm up my stiff fingers. My mind felt heavy with tiredness, but also awake with anticipation. The drive was dark and silent. I played no music. The only sound was the tires rolling over the asphalt and the heater blowing warm air into my face. I drove out of the city, past silent gas stations with their lights still on but no cars at the pumps, past the small industrial area with the smell of oil and metal even though the windows were rolled up. Eventually, I reached the highway that led out to the forest lands. The sky was starting to get lighter now, but it was still mostly black with a hint of gray at the horizon. I watched the road ahead, feeling the occasional bump when the tires rolled over cracks in the lane. My eyes felt dry, and I rubbed them with my knuckles a few times to keep them open. By the time I reached the small gravel parking area at the trailhead, it was just starting to turn from black to gray-blue. There were no other cars parked there. I turned off the engine and sat in the silent car for a moment, just listening to the ticking of the cooling engine and the quiet rustle of leaves outside. I pulled my hood tighter around my head, grabbed my backpack, and stepped out onto the gravel. The crunch under my shoes felt loud in the stillness of the early morning. I locked my car and started walking towards the trail sign, reading it under the dim light of the rising sun. The sign was old and wooden, with faded white letters. It said Black Ridge Trail, 7.5 miles one way. I felt my chest tighten a little. I hadn't planned on walking the entire thing, but I liked knowing how far it stretched. I started down the narrow dirt path. The trees on either side were mostly pine, tall and thin, their trunks dark against the slowly brightening sky. The air smelled of cold dirt, pine sap, and old wet leaves. I breathed in deeply, feeling the smell filling my chest. As I walked, small twigs cracked under my boots, and sometimes I kicked a fallen pine cone by accident. The trail wound gently uphill for the first half mile. I could hear a few early birds chirping in the distance, but otherwise it was silent. No cars, no planes, nothing but the soft wind moving through the high branches. After about an hour, the sun was fully up. It was hidden behind thin gray clouds, so the light was soft and pale, giving the forest a cold, flat look. I stopped to drink some water, sitting on a fallen log by the side of the trail. My legs felt warm and strong from the steady uphill climb. I listened to the sounds around me, trying to hear if anyone else was on the trail, but there was nothing. Just distant birds and the quiet shifting of leaves when the wind blew. I liked it. I liked being alone like that, with no one to interrupt my thoughts or force me to talk. I kept walking, deeper into the forest. The trail started to narrow and become rougher. Exposed roots crossed it like thick veins, and I had to watch each step carefully so I didn't trip. On either side, the undergrowth grew thicker, small bushes, ferns, patches of tall grass. I started to feel sweat under my arms and down my back. I pulled down my hood, letting the cold air touch my ears and cool me down. I walked for another hour before I realized I hadn't checked my phone in a while. I pulled it out, and there was no signal. Not even one bar. I wasn't surprised, but I felt a small flicker of fear in my stomach anyway. I put it back in my pocket and kept moving. At around the third hour, I started feeling tired. My feet hurt in the arches, and my thighs burned slightly with every step uphill. The trail became steeper, and the trees thinner. I could see further ahead now, and the ground was covered in fallen pine needles that cushioned my steps. The silence felt thicker here. I stopped for a moment to catch my breath and drink more water. I looked around. Everything felt still. There was no sound at all, not even birds anymore. It felt like the whole forest was holding its breath. I shook the thought away, telling myself I was just tired and feeling paranoid. I put the bottle back in my bag and kept walking. After about half a mile more, I saw something strange up ahead. The trail curved around a cluster of large rocks, and in the dirt right before the rocks, there were footprints. At first I felt relief, thinking someone else was on the trail. But when I looked closer, I felt something tighten in my chest. The footprints were deep and wide, like from heavy boots, but they were going off the trail into the trees. They didn't look like someone just stepped aside to pee or tie their shoe. They went straight off the trail, down into the thicker trees where there was no path. I stood there for a while, just looking at them. The dirt around them was still slightly damp, and the edges of the prints were sharp, not smoothed over by wind or time. They were fresh. I told myself it was probably just a hunter or a forest worker. But there were no signs posted for hunting in this area, and I hadn't seen any orange markers. I felt my heart beating harder, and I told myself to keep going. I walked past the footprints, trying not to look at them again, and rounded the rocks. On the other side, the trail sloped sharply down into a small valley where trees grew denser and darker. The ground there was covered in old leaves, brown and gray, and the sunlight barely reached down through the branches. I started walking down the slope carefully, planting each foot so I wouldn't slip on the loose dirt. As I reached the bottom, I heard a noise behind me, up near the rocks. It was quiet, like a small scuff or crunch. I froze, standing still in the middle of the trail, listening. The forest around me was silent. My ears rang with the quiet, and I felt blood pulsing in my neck. I turned slowly and looked back up the slope. There was nothing there, just the curve of the trail disappearing around the rocks. I stayed there for a while, staring, but the sound didn't come again. I shook my head, trying to calm my breathing, and kept walking down the trail. The valley at the bottom was colder. The air smelled damp and old, like rotting leaves and wet dirt. The trees here grew close together, and their branches hung low over the trail, blocking out most of the light. I had to duck under some of them, feeling the cold needles brush against my cheek and neck. I kept hearing small noises around me, the creak of a branch, the dry crackle of leaves shifting under something's weight, the faint thump of something falling far off. Each time I heard something, I stopped and listened, holding my breath. I saw no animals. No deer, no squirrels, not even birds. It felt wrong, like the whole forest was empty. I walked faster, feeling the muscles in my legs start to ache. The trail twisted and turned through the valley, sometimes narrowing so much that bushes scraped against my thighs as I passed. The sky above was gray and silent. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. I kept it in my hand anyway, just to feel like I had something to hold on to. Then I heard another noise. This time it was clearer. A soft, steady crunching sound, like someone walking carefully over dry leaves. It came from behind me, up the trail. My heart jumped into my throat, and I turned around quickly. There was nothing there, just the trail winding back through the dark trees. But the sound didn't stop. It kept coming slowly, getting louder. I felt a cold sweat break out on my back and under my arms. I scanned the trees, looking for any movement. Nothing, but the sound was still there, getting closer. I stepped off the trail and crouched behind a thick tree trunk, trying to slow my breathing. The crunching sound continued down the trail until it was right where I had been standing. I felt my hands shaking. I peeked around the tree slowly, feeling my heart beating so hard I thought it would explode. There was no one there. The trail was empty, but I could still hear the crunching, like footsteps moving around, stepping slowly, as if looking for something. I pressed my back against the tree and closed my eyes, trying to listen harder. The sound moved a few feet forward, then